My name is Olivia. I am 33 years old. My mother-in-law demanded my most precious jewelry right in the middle of a crowded elite country club dinner, thinking I would just hand it over like an obedient servant. But just as she reached across the table to rip it from my neck, my security team stepped out of the shadows. The entire dining room fell into a dead silence as her ridiculous entitlement crashed into a reality she never saw coming. Before I continue this story, please let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a toxic family member who severely underestimated you and tried to treat you like garbage. The Oakwood Country Club was the exact kind of place that smelled of expensive cigar smoke, aged leather, and desperate pretension. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over tables full of people who spent their entire lives trying to prove exactly how much money they had. I was sitting at the best VIP table right in the center of the main dining room, wearing a simple but elegant black evening gown. I felt completely out of place among these people, but I had agreed to come for the sake of my husband Brandon. I was quietly sipping my sparkling water when his mother Patricia decided it was time to make her move. She set her silver fork down with a loud clank that echoed over the soft jazz music playing in the background. She pointed a perfectly manicured finger straight at my chest. "Take that off right now, Olivia," she commanded. Her voice was sharp and intentionally loud enough that the couple at the next table actually stopped talking just to look at us. "Take it off and hand it to me." I blinked in genuine confusion, slowly lowering my water glass to the table. I looked down at the deep blue sapphire and diamond necklace resting heavily against my collarbone. "What are you talking about, Patricia?" I asked, keeping my tone perfectly even so I would not cause a scene. "Do not play dumb with me," she snapped, leaning forward so aggressively she nearly knocked over her expensive wine glass. "Audrey is celebrating her 5th wedding anniversary next week. She needs a statement piece to wear to the hospital gala. That sapphire will look absolutely stunning on her. You never wear it anyway, and honestly, a piece of high society jewelry like that is completely wasted on a computer repair girl." A computer repair girl. That was how she always described me to her wealthy friends. Patricia was absolutely obsessed with the concept of old money and social climbing. She spent every waking moment performing the role of a prestigious matriarch from a long line of wealthy aristocrats. She looked down on anyone who actually had to work for a living, and she especially loathed the fact that her precious son had married a woman who built her own career from the ground up. In her mind, because my company dealt with software and digital networks, I was basically a glorified help desk technician. She had no idea that I was the founder and chief executive officer of one of the top cybersecurity and digital forensics firms in the entire nation. She thought my long hours were spent fixing broken laptops, not securing massive government contracts, and protecting sensitive corporate data from international hackers. And because I never felt the need to brag about my success or flash my bank account balance, she assumed I was practically penniless. She constantly reminded me how lucky I was that her son had elevated my social status by marrying me. It was a massive joke considering I secretly paid the thousands of dollars required for her country club membership every single month just to keep peace in the family. But tonight was not the night to reveal my massive financial portfolio. Tonight was simply about setting boundaries. I took a deep, steadying breath, refusing to let her see that her condescending words had stung me. "No," I said calmly, looking her right in the eye. "I am not taking this off, and I am certainly not giving it to Audrey." Patricia gasped loudly as if I had just slapped her across the face. "Excuse me," she sputtered, her face turning an ugly shade of red. "This is a family emergency, Olivia. Audrey needs to look the part of a successful doctor wife. She has a high-class image to maintain in front of her peers. I am not asking you, I am telling you. Give me the necklace right now." I folded my hands on the pristine white tablecloth. "Patricia, this necklace belonged to my late mother. It is the only physical thing I have left of her. It is not a costume prop for your daughter to parade around in to impress people she does not even like. It stays on my neck where it belongs." I thought my clear boundary would be the absolute end of it, but I severely underestimated her sheer entitlement and endless need for control. Patricia slammed both hands flat on the table and stood up. The loud scraping of her heavy wooden chair against the marble floor drew the immediate attention of half the dining room. People were turning their heads, watching us with morbid curiosity and hushed whispers. "You selfish, ungrateful little brat!" she shouted, her voice completely abandoning the refined tone she usually faked for public appearances. "My son brought you into this beautiful world of extreme luxury. We gave you a seat at this prestigious VIP table. You owe this entire family absolutely everything you have. You do not get to sit here eating our expensive food while denying my daughter what she rightfully deserves. Hand over that sapphire necklace right now before I reach over and rip it off your neck myself." I turned my gaze slowly toward my husband. Brandon was sitting to my right, swirling a measure of expensive Cabernet in his crystal glass. I waited for him to speak up. I waited for the man who had vowed to protect and cherish me, to tell his mother that she was crossing a massive line. In any normal marriage, a husband would immediately de-escalate the situation. He would firmly remind his mother that my late mother's heirloom was completely off limits. He would defend his wife against such a blatant public attack. Instead, Brandon let out a heavy, irritated sigh. He placed his wine glass down on the table and looked at me not with support, but with utter annoyance. He looked at me exactly the way a frustrated teacher looks at a disobedient child ruining a perfectly good lesson. "Olivia, for heaven's sake, just take the necklace off and give it to her," Brandon said. His voice was smooth, polished, and dripping with absolute condescension. "Do not make a massive scene in front of my colleagues and clients. You know how incredibly important this evening is for my networking and career advancement." I stared at him, feeling the remaining warmth in my blood turn completely to ice. Brandon was a wealth manager, a man whose entire existence revolved around projecting an image of immense prosperity and absolute control. He wore a custom-tailored Italian suit that I had secretly paid for, yet he sat there treating me like an ungrateful burden. I asked him if he was seriously taking her side regarding my deceased mother's jewelry. He adjusted his expensive silk tie, leaned closer to me, and lowered his voice into a harsh, commanding whisper that was meant to intimidate me into immediate submission. "It is just a piece of jewelry, Olivia," he hissed, his eyes darting around the room to ensure the right people were not listening. "My sister Audrey is celebrating a major milestone. 5 years of marriage to Jamal is a big deal in our social circle. They have important appearances to make at the hospital gala, and you know they have been going through a rough patch financially. It is your absolute duty to support this family. Your duty." The word echoed loudly in my mind. Brandon actually believed I owed them my most sacred possession simply because I had the supposed privilege of marrying into his prestigious family. He continued his deeply insulting lecture, completely oblivious to the cold fury building inside my chest. "When I brought you into this family," he said, keeping that fake, pleasant smile plastered on his face for the surrounding tables to see, "we agreed that we would operate as a single unit. Audrey needs that sapphire to complete her gala outfit. It is a necessary investment in our family's public image. You sitting in a dark room typing on a keyboard all day does not require a diamond and sapphire pendant. Just unhook the clasp and hand it to my mother. We can buy you a nice cubic zirconia replacement next week if you really need something shiny to look at while you fix computer bugs." The sheer audacity of his statement was breathtaking. He was asking me to fund his sister's fake high society lifestyle by surrendering the absolute last piece of my heart. He was trivializing my grief, my mother's memory, and my entire existence just to pacify his greedy mother. Emboldened by her son's unwavering support, Patricia's face twisted into a triumphant, predatory smirk. "See?" she sneered, her eyes gleaming with pure malice. "Even my own son knows you are being incredibly selfish right now. You are acting like a spoiled child who refuses to share her toys. Now stop throwing a pathetic tantrum and hand it over before I lose my temper entirely." When I remained perfectly still, my hands resting calmly on my lap, her impatience boiled over into unhinged physical aggression. Patricia pushed herself up from her chair entirely. She lunged across the wide dining table, knocking over a crystal water goblet in her frantic haste. The ice water spilled rapidly across the pristine white linen, but she did not care at all. Her manicured hands, heavily loaded with diamond rings I had bankrolled, reached directly for my throat. She was actually going to physically assault me in the middle of the Oakwood Country Club, to violently strip a necklace from my body. She wanted to physically dominate me to prove her absolute power over my life. She never even made contact. Before Patricia's grasping fingers could brush the skin of my collarbone, a massive shadow detached itself from the dim corner of the dining room. Gideon moved with a silent, terrifying speed that completely defied his towering frame. My security chief did not wear a highly visible earpiece or an aggressive tactical uniform that would draw unnecessary attention. He wore a perfectly tailored dark suit that allowed him to blend flawlessly into the background of high society events, waiting patiently for exactly this type of moment. He materialized right beside my chair like a phantom summoned from the dark. Without uttering a single word, Gideon intercepted Patricia's outstretched arm mid-air. His massive hand wrapped around her wrist like an inescapable steel vice. Patricia let out a sharp gasp of shock, followed immediately by a whimpering cry of genuine physical pain. Gideon did not strike her or violently shove her away. He simply applied a precise, highly calculated amount of pressure to her nerve points while twisting her wrist backward at a deeply uncomfortable angle. The mechanical leverage forced Patricia to immediately retreat to alleviate the sudden agony shooting up her arm. She stumbled backward, her knees buckling slightly as Gideon's relentless grip guided her forcefully but silently back into her heavy wooden dining chair. He pinned her arm to the table just long enough to ensure she was securely seated, then stepped back, positioning his towering body directly between her and me. He crossed his massive arms over his broad chest, his face an emotionless mask of carved stone, his cold eyes locking onto Brandon with a silent, highly lethal warning. The message radiated from his posture with undeniable clarity. Anyone who dared to step toward me would face immediate devastating consequences. Gideon had spent years in special operations before I hired him, and his ability to neutralize a threat without creating unnecessary collateral damage was unparalleled. He stood there like an immovable fortress, radiating a quiet danger that commanded absolute respect from everyone in his vicinity. The physical altercation had been swift, brutally efficient, and absolutely impossible to ignore. The ambient, cheerful chatter of the country club died instantly. The pleasant clinking of expensive silverware against fine china completely ceased. Waiters froze in their tracks, balancing silver trays of champagne in midair. The soft jazz music playing over the hidden speakers suddenly felt incredibly deafening in the sudden vacuum of human voices. The entire dining room fell into a dead, suffocating silence as dozens of elite patrons, corporate executives, and wealthy socialites stared openly at the table. They watched in absolute shock as the supposedly untouchable wealthy matriarch was forcefully subdued by a professional bodyguard right at her own dinner table. The perfect illusion of their high society evening was completely shattered. The silence did not last long. Patricia, realizing that her display of dominance had spectacularly backfired, instantly pivoted to her most well-rehearsed role, the helpless victim. She clutched her wrist against her chest, her face contorting into a mask of exaggerated agony. She let out a piercing shriek that cut through the lingering quiet, ensuring every eye in the dining room remained fixed on our table. "Assault!" she screamed, her voice trembling with manufactured terror. "Did you all see that? This thug just assaulted me. I am an elderly woman and this brute nearly broke my arm." She looked around frantically, appealing to the wealthy onlookers, hoping they would rally to her defense. Her performance was Oscar-worthy. She cradled her arm as if it were shattered, casting terrified glances at Gideon, who remained standing impassively behind me. He did not react to her histrionics. He simply watched her with the calm detachment of a predator observing a panicked mouse. Brandon, unable to stand his mother's humiliation and furious that his carefully curated public image was being tarnished, finally reacted. He slammed his hands on the table and shot up from his chair, his face dark with rage. He completely ignored his mother's obvious theatrics and directed his anger entirely at me and my security chief. "What the hell is wrong with you, Brandon?" roared his voice echoing across the dining room. He pointed a shaking finger at Gideon. "You are fired. Pack your things and get out of this club right now before I call the police and have you arrested for assault." He turned his glaring eyes to me, his chest heaving. "And you, Olivia, how dare you bring this hired muscle into my mother's country club? Who do you think you are? You think because you pay for a glorified driver he can lay hands on my mother. You are going to apologize to her right now, and then you are going to hand over that necklace." He assumed Gideon was just a low-level employee, a rented driver, or a basic security guard I had hired to look important. He had no idea that Gideon was a highly trained specialist, an integral part of my company's executive protection detail, whose salary likely eclipsed Brandon's own inflated income. Brandon's ego was bruised, and he was lashing out desperately, trying to reassert his authority in front of his peers. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I did not offer the frantic apologies he expected. I simply reached for my wine glass, lifting it with a steady hand. The deep red liquid caught the light of the chandeliers as I took a slow, deliberate sip. I let the silence stretch, forcing Brandon and Patricia to sit in the uncomfortable aftermath of their own outbursts. "Gideon," I said softly, not breaking eye contact with my husband. "Step back, please. But stay close." Gideon immediately complied, taking one smooth step backward, blending seamlessly into the shadows again, though his presence remained a palpable weight in the room. He was close enough to intervene in a fraction of a second if necessary, but far enough away to allow the conversation to proceed. I placed my wine glass back on the table, the delicate clink sounding incredibly loud in the tense atmosphere. I looked at Brandon, seeing past the expensive suit and the arrogant facade, seeing the weak, entitled man he truly was. The man who would gladly strip his wife of her mother's memory just to appease his manipulative family. "Brandon." I began, my voice cold and crisp, cutting through the lingering murmurs of the surrounding tables. "You seem to be under a severe misconception about how things work. You do not have the authority to fire my staff. Gideon works for me, and he acted exactly as he was trained to act when someone attempts to physically assault his principal." Brandon's face reddened further. "She is my mother," he hissed. "She was not going to hurt you. She just wanted the necklace." And I said no. I replied, my tone unwavering. My answer was no. The fact that she felt entitled to resort to physical violence to take what does not belong to her is her problem, not mine. And the fact that you sat there and watched her try to do it tells me everything I need to know about where your loyalties lie." Patricia, still clutching her wrist, let out another dramatic sob. "She is completely unhinged, Brandon. Look at what she has done. She is trying to destroy this family." I ignored her completely, keeping my focus locked on Brandon. "This entire evening," I said, leaning slightly forward, "has been an illuminating experience. I agreed to come here to support you, to play the role of the dutiful wife for your colleagues. But I will not be bullied. I will not be assaulted. And I will certainly not be commanded to hand over my mother's necklace so your sister can play dress-up." I saw the confusion flicker in Brandon's eyes. He was not used to me speaking to him this way. For the entire duration of our marriage, I had been accommodating, eager to please, willing to overlook his family's subtle insults and passive-aggressive behavior for the sake of peace. I had played the role he wanted me to play. But that woman was gone. "You are making a massive mistake," Olivia Brandon threatened, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous rumble. "You are humiliating me in front of people who matter. You need to fix this right now. I am not the one who needs to fix anything." "Brandon," I said, sitting back in my chair, "you and your mother created this situation. You can deal with the consequences. I picked up my wine glass again, my hand completely steady. The cold justice I had been planning for months was finally beginning to unfold, and I was perfectly content to watch them unravel. I was no longer the submissive wife they thought they could control. I was the architect of their impending ruin, and they were too blinded by their own arrogance to see it coming. Patricia's face transitioned from a mask of manufactured pain to a portrait of unhinged, venomous fury. The realization that her public performance had completely failed to break my resolve sent her over the edge. She dropped her supposedly injured wrist, suddenly miraculously healed, and slammed both hands onto the table. Her chest heaved as she leaned forward, her eyes wide and bloodshot, completely disregarding the hushed whispers of the wealthy country club patrons surrounding us. The elite facade she had spent decades meticulously constructing shattered into a million jagged pieces right there in the VIP dining room. She was no longer a refined socialite. She was a desperate woman losing her grip on her most valuable asset. "You arrogant, worthless little brat!" Patricia screamed, her shrill voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "You think you can humiliate me in my own club? You think you have any power in this dynamic? I am the matriarch of this family, and you are nothing but a common street rat we took pity on. I will destroy you for this, Olivia. I will make sure Brandon files for divorce tomorrow morning. I will have him throw you out of our luxury downtown penthouse before the sun even sets. You will be packing your cheap little computer repair tools in garbage bags and sleeping on the sidewalk. That penthouse belongs to my son. It belongs to our family legacy. You will leave this marriage with absolutely nothing, just the pathetic, empty pockets you brought into it." The sheer delusion of her threat was almost comical. The luxury downtown penthouse she was screaming about, the sprawling multi-level residence with panoramic views of the city skyline, had absolutely nothing to do with her son or her family legacy. But I let her continue her rant, allowing her to dig her own grave deeper in front of the city's most influential executives. Every word she screamed was another nail in the coffin of her fake prestige. "That is right," Audrey chimed in, leaning across the table with a vicious sneer. Audrey was the golden child, the spoiled princess, who believed the universe owed her a life of endless luxury. She sat next to her husband Jamal, a highly respected orthopedic surgeon who was watching the entire exchange with a deep, silent frown of uncomfortable confusion. Audrey pointed a manicured finger at my black evening gown, her eyes dripping with absolute disgust. "Look at you," she mocked, her tone razor-sharp and full of elitist venom. "You do not even belong in a place like this. That dress looks like you picked it off a clearance rack at a discount department store. You have zero class, zero style, and zero understanding of what it means to be part of a prestigious lineage." Audrey tossed her hair over her shoulder, desperately clinging to the illusion of her superiority. "You should be on your knees thanking us every single day," she continued, her voice raising to match her mother's hysterical pitch. "We let a complete nobody marry into one of the most respected families in the city. We gave you our name. We gave you access to our social circle. We allowed you to sit at our table. The absolute least you could do is show some gratitude and hand over a piece of jewelry that you do not even have the pedigree to pull off. You are an embarrassment to my brother, and you are an embarrassment to us. Hand over the sapphire and get out of our sight before we ruin you completely." Brandon sat beside them, nodding in fervent agreement, his chest puffed out with false bravado. He clearly believed that the combined verbal assault from his mother and sister would finally break my spirit. He expected me to crumble, to burst into tears, to frantically apologize, and unhook the sapphire necklace just to stop the overwhelming public humiliation. That was always their strategy. They isolated their target, launched a coordinated barrage of emotional abuse, and relied on the victim's fear of public conflict to force absolute submission. He looked at me with cold, dead eyes, waiting for me to surrender. But I did not cry. I did not shout. I did not offer a single word of defense or justification. I sat in my chair with perfect posture, completely unaffected by the venomous words being hurled across the dining table. My breathing remained slow and steady, My heart rate did not elevate. I looked at Patricia's flushed, furious face, then at Audrey's sneering, entitled expression, and finally at Brandon's smug, expectant smirk. They were so incredibly predictable, operating on a script I had already memorized and completely dismantled months ago. I reached down to the floor beside my chair and picked up my designer handbag. It was a custom limited edition piece that cost more than Brandon earned in an entire quarter, though his family lacked the true wealth required to even recognize its value. The simple, elegant movement drew the immediate attention of everyone at the table. Patricia stopped her frantic breathing. Audrey narrowed her eyes, watching my hands closely. Brandon leaned back, a triumphant smile spreading across his face, clearly assuming I was reaching inside to retrieve the jewelry box to surrender the necklace. Instead of a jewelry box, my hand wrapped around something much heavier and infinitely more dangerous. I maintained steady, piercing eye contact with my husband as I slowly pulled my hand out of the bag. Gideon stood perfectly still behind me, his massive presence ensuring that nobody would dare try to snatch what I was about to reveal. I withdrew a thick, securely sealed legal folder. The heavy manila envelope was stuffed with hundreds of pages of meticulously gathered evidence binding financial contracts and devastating forensic data. I held it in my hands for a brief second, feeling the undeniable weight of the power it contained. This was not just a folder of papers. It was the absolute end of their entire world. It was the weapon that would strip away every lie they had ever told. With a slow, deliberate motion, I raised the folder and brought it down hard onto the center of the pristine dining table. The heavy thud echoed sharply, cutting through the remaining tension in the room like a gunshot. The crystal water glasses vibrated from the impact. Patricia jumped in her seat. Audrey flinched backward, her mocking smile instantly vanishing. Brandon stared at the thick envelope, his triumphant smirk slowly melting into a mask of deep, sudden apprehension. The trap was perfectly set, the audience was watching, and I was finally ready to burn their illusions to the ground. I broke the seal on the heavy manila folder with a swift, decisive tear. The sound was incredibly sharp in the quiet dining room. I reached inside and pulled out a thick stack of crisp legal documents, the bright white paper contrasting starkly with the dark mahogany of the country club table. I selected the first document from the top of the pile, a heavy packet fastened with a brass clip and bearing a raised state seal. I placed my fingertips on the edge of the paper and slid it smoothly across the polished surface directly toward Patricia. The document came to a halt right next to her empty wine glass. Patricia stared down at the paper as if it were a venomous snake. She did not immediately reach for it. Her eyes darted from the document to my face, searching for a sign of hesitation or bluffing. When she found absolutely none, her bravado faltered for a fraction of a second. She scoffed, crossing her arms defensively over her chest. "What is this garbage?" Patricia demanded, her voice dripping with artificial disdain. "Do you honestly expect me to read your little printouts? I just told you that my son is going to throw you out onto the street and you respond by handing me paperwork. You are completely delusional, Olivia." I did not break eye contact. I leaned back comfortably in my chair and rested my hands in my lap. "I strongly suggest you look at the first page, Patricia." I said, my tone perfectly even and devoid of any emotion. "You were just screaming at the top of your lungs about how Brandon is going to kick me out of his luxury downtown penthouse. You were incredibly vocal about how I would be packing my bags and sleeping on the sidewalk. That document right in front of you is the official notarized property deed to that exact penthouse." Brandon shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He leaned over his mother's shoulder, his eyes narrowing as he tried to read the bold print at the top of the page upside down. His brow furrowed in confusion. I kept my gaze locked on Patricia. "The penthouse does not belong to your son," I stated clearly, ensuring my voice carried just enough for the neighboring tables to catch the devastating truth. "It never has. That sprawling, multi-million-dollar residence with the panoramic views of the city skyline is completely owned by a corporate holding company. And I am the sole owner and chief executive officer of that holding company. I own 100% of the equity." The color instantly drained from Brandon's face. He snatched the document from the table before his mother could even touch it. His eyes darted rapidly across the legal jargon, scanning the highlighted sections, the notarized signatures, and the official county clerk stamps. His hands actually began to tremble. As a wealth manager, he knew exactly what he was looking at. He understood the irrefutable legality of a corporate property deed. "That is completely impossible," Brandon stammered, his voice cracking with sudden, overwhelming panic. He looked up at me, his arrogant facade shattering into a mask of pure desperation. "I pay the utility bills. I pay the building association fees. I manage the accounts for that property. You pay the utility bills because you are legally classified as a month-to-month tenant," I corrected him, my voice slicing through his pathetic defense like a surgical scalpel. "I set it up that way so you could feel like the man of the house. You handle the minor monthly expenses to satisfy your fragile ego, but you do not own a single square inch of that property. You hold absolutely zero equity. If anyone is getting thrown out onto the street tomorrow morning, Brandon, it will be you. My security team already has the eviction notice drafted and ready to be served." Patricia slammed her hand on the table, refusing to accept the reality unfolding right in front of her. "This is a complete forgery!" she shrieked, her voice rising in panicked denial. She reached over and ripped the document out of Brandon's shaking hands. "You printed this off the internet. You are a computer repair girl. There is absolutely no way a nobody like you could ever afford a penthouse in the most exclusive zip code in the city. My son is a highly successful wealth manager. He is the provider. He is the one who secured that real estate." She looked around the dining room, desperately seeking validation from the wealthy onlookers who were now openly eavesdropping on our table. "She is lying," Patricia announced to the surrounding patrons, her voice bordering on hysterical. "She is a manipulative little liar trying to steal my son's assets." I let her finish her frantic, humiliating display before I delivered the final crushing blow. "I purchased that penthouse in an all-cash transaction 3 years before I even met your son," I explained, meticulously detailing the legal structure to leave no room for her delusions. "I established a Delaware-based limited liability company specifically to acquire high-value real estate assets anonymously. I used a blind trust mechanism to shield my identity from public property records, which is why Brandon never found my name when he ran his superficial background checks. When we moved in together, I had my corporate attorneys draft a residential lease agreement. Brandon signed it blindly, assuming it was standard building association paperwork, because he was too arrogant to actually read the documents his computer girl wife handed him. I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the table, forcing Patricia to look directly into my eyes. "Because the asset was acquired prior to our marriage and is held entirely within a separate corporate structure that I independently fund, it is completely insulated from any marital claims. Even in a community property state, Brandon has zero legal standing to claim a single penny of its value. Your son is a glorified renter, Patricia. He has been living in my house, sleeping in my bed, and playing the role of a wealthy provider on my dime." Brandon dropped his head into his hands, completely devastated. The realization that his entire identity was a manufactured illusion hit him with the force of a freight train. He was a wealth manager who did not even own his own home. He was a man obsessed with status, who was entirely dependent on the wife he had just publicly betrayed. Patricia stared at the deed in her hands, her mouth opening and closing without producing any sound. The official stamps, the corporate seals, the undeniable proof of my ownership, were right there in black and white. She could not gaslight her way out of a notarized state document. The ultimate threat she had used to try and force my submission had just been effortlessly turned around and pointed directly at her son's chest. This was the first domino to fall. I watched the profound shock wash over their faces, feeling a deep, satisfying sense of cold justice. They had pushed me into a corner, expecting me to cower in fear of losing their prestigious lifestyle. They had absolutely no idea that I was the one who owned the corner of the building and the very ground they were standing on. I reached into the heavy manila folder again, my fingers brushing against the next stack of documents. The penthouse was just the beginning. I was completely ready to tear down the rest of their fraudulent empire. I reached back into the heavy manila folder, my fingers sliding past the remaining property records until they found the thick stack of financial statements. Patricia was staring blankly at the penthouse deed, her chest heaving as she struggled to process the sudden loss of her most powerful weapon. She looked around the dining room, her eyes darting frantically toward the neighboring tables where her wealthy friends were watching with barely concealed delight. In her world, weakness was blood in the water, and the sharks were circling. "Keep your voice down," Patricia hissed, dropping her tone to a venomous, desperate whisper. Her manicured nails dug into the pristine white tablecloth. "You have made your point about the real estate, Olivia. Now put those papers away before you cause a permanent scandal. You are humiliating us in front of the board members. We can discuss this at home like civilized people." I did not lower my voice. I ensured my articulation was perfectly crisp, projecting my words so that the silence of the dining room carried them to every single listening ear. "We are not going home, Patricia," I stated clearly. "And we are certainly not civilized. You forfeited the right to a private conversation the moment you tried to physically attack me in public. You wanted an audience to witness my submission. Instead, they are going to witness your total exposure." I pulled out a stapled packet of documents and tossed it onto the center of the table. The cover page bore the unmistakable bold seal of the United States Bankruptcy Court. Brandon flinched, recognizing the layout immediately. He reached for it, but Gideon shifted his massive weight just a fraction of an inch, freezing my husband in his tracks. "Patricia." I began, keeping my gaze locked on her horrified face. "You have spent the last 4 years marching around this country club demanding respect because of your supposed old money lineage. You treat the staff like peasants. You mock anyone who works for a living. You constantly remind everyone that your family wealth is untouchable. It is a brilliant performance." I tapped my fingernail against the bankruptcy filing. "But the performance ends tonight. 4 years ago, your late husband's manufacturing business did not suffer a mild market downturn as you claimed to your elite friends. It completely imploded. You liquidated your summer home, sold your antique jewelry collection, and filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy. Your prestigious old money fortune was entirely wiped out 48 months ago. You have been completely broke since before I even met your son." Gasps rippled through the surrounding tables. An older woman wearing a diamond tennis bracelet 2 tables over covered her mouth in shock. A prominent local politician leaned in closer, his eyes wide with scandalized fascination. In the fiercely competitive, status-obsessed ecosystem of the Oakwood Country Club, faking your wealth while looking down on others was a social death sentence. Patricia's face turned a sickening shade of gray. She shrank back into her heavy wooden dining chair, her previous aggressive posture entirely vanishing. "That is a lie," she stammered, her voice shaking so badly she could barely form the words. "We restructured our assets. You are fabricating these documents to ruin my good name." "I am doing no such thing," I countered smoothly. "I run a digital forensics firm. Uncovering buried financial data is literally what people pay me millions of dollars to do. Finding your messy bankruptcy filings took my junior analyst exactly 12 minutes. You have zero liquidity and zero assets. The only thing you have is an astronomical mountain of hidden debt." Brandon buried his face in his hands, unable to look at anyone. He had spent years maintaining the illusion of being a top-tier wealth manager who handled his family's massive portfolio. Now his peers were watching his entire fraudulent existence collapse in real time. "But if you are completely broke," I continued, my voice echoing in the dead quiet of the room, "how exactly do you afford this lavish lifestyle? How do you pay the exorbitant monthly membership dues for this exclusive club? How does Audrey drive a brand new Porsche Cayenne to her charity luncheons? How are you covering the $5,000 bill for the vintage wine and prime steaks you ordered for tonight's anniversary dinner?" Patricia stared at me, her eyes wide with a sudden dawning terror. She knew the answer, but she had never dared to speak it out loud. She had convinced herself that Brandon was magically providing the funds, deliberately ignoring the reality of his mediocre salary. I reached into my designer handbag one last time. I pulled out a sleek, heavy metal corporate black card and set it down gently on top of the bankruptcy filing. The matte black surface absorbed the light of the crystal chandeliers. "Every single luxury you have enjoyed for the past 3 years has been funded by me," I announced, delivering the ultimate killing blow to her social facade. "The Oakwood Country Club membership dues are automatically charged to my corporate black card on the first of every month. The lease payments for Audrey's Porsche are deducted from my secondary business account. The designer clothes you wear, the expensive dinners you host to impress these people, even the vintage Cabernet you are currently drinking, it all comes directly from the bank account of the computer repair girl you so deeply despise." I let the absolute truth hang in the air, watching it crush the last remaining fragments of her dignity. "You are not a wealthy matriarch, Patricia. You are a charity case. You have been living entirely on my payroll while treating me like garbage. And effective as of 10 minutes ago, I have permanently canceled every single card and revoked every membership you have access to." The silence in the dining room was absolute. Patricia sat, frozen, tears of profound humiliation welling in her eyes. Her social reputation was permanently obliterated. Audrey, sitting in stunned silence, suddenly slammed her hands on the table, her face flushed with blind panic as she realized her free ride was over. The immediate aftermath of my revelation was absolute, unadulterated chaos. Patricia sat completely immobilized by the sheer magnitude of her public exposure. Her face had lost all color, rendering her a pale, trembling shell of the arrogant woman who had demanded my jewelry just minutes earlier. The illusion of her old money prestige, the carefully constructed facade that she had used to terrorize and belittle me, had been entirely eradicated. The surrounding tables, initially stunned into silence by the escalating confrontation, were now buzzing with electrified whispers. The scandal was spreading through the Oakwood Country Club like wildfire, and there was absolutely no way to contain it. Audrey, however, reacted with the frantic desperation of a cornered animal. She realized that the financial umbilical cord she relied on was severed, and her perfect subsidized life was vanishing before her very eyes. Her panic manifested as pure, unfiltered rage. She slammed her hands down on the table, her face flushed with a mixture of terror and fury. The diamond tennis bracelet on her wrist, paid for by my company, clattered loudly against the wood. "You are a pathological liar!" Olivia Audrey shrieked, her voice cracking as she desperately tried to drown out the murmurs of the neighboring patrons. Her eyes darted wildly around the room, seeking any form of validation. "Do not listen to her," she announced to the people staring at our table. "She is a manipulative, jealous nobody who is trying to ruin our family because she can never be one of us. These documents are fake. She printed them off the internet to cause a scene because she is bitter and pathetic." Audrey's attempt to gaslight the entire dining room was breathtakingly arrogant, but it was also entirely futile. The heavy notarized documents sitting on the table were undeniable proof, and the sheer detail of my exposure left no room for doubt. The elite members of the country club were not foolish; they could recognize the stench of a shattered illusion from a mile away. Realizing that her screaming was only making her look more unhinged, Audrey shifted tactics. She turned abruptly to her right, grasping the arm of her husband, Jamal. Jamal was a brilliant orthopedic surgeon. He was a tall, imposing African-American man with a calm, commanding presence that commanded respect in any room he entered. Unlike the rest of Brandon's family, Jamal had actually earned his success. He worked grueling hours at the hospital, performing complex surgeries and building a sterling reputation through sheer talent and dedication. I had always respected him, and it genuinely pained me that he was entangled in this toxic family dynamic. Audrey dug her manicured nails into Jamal's forearm, using him as a physical and social shield. "Jamal, do something," she demanded, her voice shrill and commanding. "Call the hospital's legal team right now. I want her sued for defamation." I want her thrown out of this club and arrested for forging financial documents. Tell them who you are. Tell them that we do not need a dime from this computer repair girl." Jamal looked completely bewildered. He had been sitting in stunned silence since the confrontation began, entirely unaware of the deep financial rot running through his wife's family. He had believed the same lies they sold to everyone else, that Patricia was a wealthy heiress, and Brandon was a highly successful wealth manager. He believed Audrey's lavish spending was simply a reflection of her family's prosperity combined with his own substantial income as a surgeon. He had absolutely no idea that their lifestyle was being subsidized by the woman sitting across from him. Jamal gently but firmly detached Audrey's hands from his arm. He looked at her flushed, frantic face, then at the thick stack of legal documents resting in the center of the table. The confusion in his eyes was profound. He was a man of science and logic, and the math of his life was suddenly failing to compute. "Audrey, please lower your voice," Jamal said, his tone deep and steady, an attempt to de-escalate the spiraling situation. "You are making a scene. Let us just take a breath and figure out what is actually going on here." "Do not tell me to lower my voice." Audrey snapped, her panic overriding any sense of decorum. "She is attacking our family. She is trying to humiliate my mother. You need to defend me, Jamal. Call your lawyers right now and destroy her." Jamal looked at me, his brow furrowed. He did not see a vindictive, jealous liar. He saw a woman who had just methodically dismantled a massive deception with irrefutable evidence. He looked back at Audrey, his expression shifting from confusion to a deep, unsettling concern. He was starting to realize that the hysterical woman beside him was fighting a losing battle against the truth. "Olivia," Jamal said carefully, addressing me directly for the first time since the argument erupted. "What exactly is going on here? Are you honestly saying that you have been funding Patricia and Brandon's lifestyle?" I nodded slowly, maintaining a respectful tone. "I am sorry that you are caught in the middle of this, Jamal. I truly am. But yes, the documents on the table are completely authentic. Patricia filed for bankruptcy 4 years ago. Brandon does not own the penthouse, and he does not make nearly enough money to support the image he projects. Every luxury this family has enjoyed since I married Brandon has been paid for by my company." Audrey let out a sound of pure frustration, slapping the table again. "Stop listening to her, Jamal. She is a liar. She is trying to turn you against me. Why would you believe a word she says over your own wife?" "Because she brought receipts," Audrey, Jamal replied softly, his eyes fixed on the bankruptcy filing bearing the federal court seal. He reached out tentatively, his large hand hovering over the stack of papers. He was a man who dealt in facts and x-rays and lab results. The evidence on the table was impossible to ignore. Audrey lunged forward, trying to snatch the documents away before Jamal could touch them. "Do not look at that garbage!" she shrieked, her desperation reaching a fever pitch. "It is all fake! I promise you, Jamal, it is all fake!" Before Audrey's fingers could graze the papers, Gideon moved. He did not step fully out of the shadows, but his hand shot forward with terrifying speed, cleanly intercepting Audrey's wrist. He did not twist it or apply pressure as he had with Patricia. He simply stopped her forward momentum with an immovable iron grip. "Do not touch the documents, ma'am," Gideon said, his voice a low, rumbling warning that vibrated through the table. Audrey yanked her arm back as if she had been burned, her eyes wide with shock. Jamal immediately shifted his posture, his protective instincts flaring, but he did not escalate the physical confrontation. He recognized that Gideon was acting in a purely defensive capacity. The tension at the table was suffocating. The entire dining room was holding its breath, watching the golden child of the family completely unravel. I turned my attention away from Audrey and her frantic, humiliating display. I shifted my gaze directly to Jamal. When I looked at him, I deliberately softened my posture. I dropped the razor-sharp edge from my voice and the cold, defensive wall I had built to deal with Patricia and Brandon. Jamal did not deserve my hostility. He was a brilliant orthopedic surgeon, a man who spent his days repairing shattered bones and saving lives. He worked grueling 80-hour weeks, standing on his feet in operating rooms, carrying the literal weight of human lives in his hands. He had built his wealth and reputation through relentless discipline and undeniable talent. He was the only other person at this table who actually understood what it meant to earn every single dollar to his name. Jamal, I said, keeping my voice low, steady, and filled with genuine respect, I am incredibly sorry that you had to be dragged into this mess tonight. You are a good man, you are a hard-working professional, and you have always treated me with kindness. You are the only member of this family who ever looked at me as an equal, rather than something to be scraped off the bottom of a shoe. It truly pains me that your integrity has been tangled up in their web of endless deception. But you deserve to know the truth about your own life, just as much as I deserve to know the truth about mine. Jamal kept his dark eyes locked on mine. He did not speak, but the rigid set of his broad shoulders indicated he was bracing for a massive impact. He was a doctor. He knew how to deliver bad news, and he recognized the exact tone of voice of someone who was about to alter his reality forever. I reached into my designer handbag for the very last time. My fingers bypassed the remaining property deeds and corporate tax returns, finding a separate, much smaller manila envelope. This one was sealed with red tamper-evident tape. I pulled it out and rested it on the table. This does not concern Brandon or Patricia, I explained, maintaining my calm demeanor. This concerns your marriage, your clinic earnings, and the future of your children. My company ran a deep forensic diagnostic on the financial networks connected to this family. What we found regarding your personal accounts was highly disturbing. I placed my fingertips on the edge of the thick envelope and slid it smoothly across the polished mahogany surface directly toward Jamal. Audrey let out a visceral, panicked gasp. Her eyes went wide with absolute terror. She knew exactly what was in that envelope. The fake bravado she had been hiding behind completely evaporated, replaced by the primal fear of a cornered thief. "No!" she screamed, her voice cracking hysterically. "Do not look at that, Jamal. It is lies. She is trying to poison you against me." Audrey lunged across the table with wild, uncoordinated desperation. She threw her entire upper body forward, her manicured hands clawing frantically at the wood, trying to snatch the sealed envelope before it could reach her husband. She was not fast enough. Gideon stepped forward with breathtaking precision. He did not strike her or use unnecessary force. He simply inserted his massive forearm into her path, creating an impenetrable physical barrier between Audrey and the envelope. He smoothly deflected her reaching hands, blocking her frantic grasp with the effortless ease of a concrete wall, stopping a gentle breeze. Audrey collided with his arm and bounced back into her chair, gasping for breath, completely powerless to stop the inevitable. Jamal reached out and picked up the envelope. He did not look at his wife, who was now weeping hysterically beside him, begging him to throw the packet away. He kept his eyes on the red security seal. His hands, the incredibly steady hands of a master surgeon, hesitated for just a fraction of a second before he broke the seal and pulled out the crisp, high-resolution financial forensic reports. The entire dining room seemed to hold its breath. I sat back and watched his facial expressions, observing the clinical, methodical way he began to process the information. At first, his brow furrowed in deep confusion. He was looking at data sets, routing numbers, and offshore wire transfer logs that made absolutely no sense to him. I had printed the reports with clear, highlighted summaries, removing the complex binary code and leaving only the undeniable monetary trails. I watched his dark eyes scan the first page. He recognized his own primary banking accounts, the ones where his substantial surgical paychecks were deposited every 2 weeks. He recognized the routing numbers for the joint savings accounts he shared with Audrey, the funds they had explicitly earmarked for their children's college tuition and their future investments. Then I saw the exact moment the confusion shifted into something far darker. His eyes tracked the highlighted withdrawal columns. He saw the systematic, highly organized funneling of massive sums of money out of his secure accounts. His lips parted slightly. The breath hitched in his chest. Jamal flipped to the second page, which detailed the destination of those stolen funds. His sharp, intelligent mind rapidly connected the dots. The money was not going to an investment portfolio. It was not going to a trust fund for their kids. It was being wired directly into private hidden accounts, controlled entirely by his brother-in-law Brandon. The transformation of Jamal's face was devastating. The calm surgeon dissolved, replaced by a man whose foundation of trust had been obliterated. His jaw clenched tightly. The dark brown of his eyes lost all its warmth, turning into cold, hard obsidian. He sat completely frozen in absolute disbelief, his entire world violently crumbling right around him. Jamal did not blink. His large hands gripped the edges of the forensic printout so tightly that his knuckles turned completely white. I watched the heavy realization wash over him as his brilliant mind aligned the devastating columns of numbers with the everyday lies his wife had fed him. He was looking at the undeniable proof of massive financial infidelity. The carefully highlighted rows on the paper were not just missing dollars. They represented thousands of hours he spent standing in sterile operating rooms and missing dinners with his children, all for a future that had been secretly plundered. I leaned forward slightly, keeping my voice incredibly calm, guiding him through the dense digital forensics my team had compiled. I know the routing codes can be difficult to translate at first glance, I explained softly, ensuring the rest of the dining room could not hear the intimate details of his ruined marriage. But look at the summary on the second page. Those are the specific accounts Audrey promised you she was managing for your children. The college trust funds you have been aggressively funding for the past 3 years. Jamal slowly turned the page. The paper rattled faintly in his shaking hands. The color drained from his face as he stared at the final balance of the accounts meant to secure his kids' educational future. The accounts were practically empty. There was no robust investment portfolio. There was no compounding interest. There was only a hollow shell of an account bled dry month after month by the very woman he trusted to manage their family estate. Audrey did not put your surgical earnings into those trusts, I stated, laying out the ugly truth with absolute precision. Every time you handed over a paycheck to build a safety net for your kids, she intercepted the capital. The digital trace is flawless. She had direct authorized access to your primary deposits. She simply diverted the assets before they ever reached the intended destination. Jamal slowly raised his head. His gaze shifted from the documents to his wife. Audrey was shaking violently, her face pale and covered in a sheen of cold sweat. She could not meet his eyes. She stared at the expensive mahogany table, her breathing shallow and frantic. "But where did it go?" Jamal asked. His voice was a low, dangerous rumble that commanded the immediate attention of the entire table. It did not sound like a question. It sounded like the final warning of a man who had just discovered a predator in his home. I directed his attention to the third page of the packet. The funneling scheme was remarkably aggressive, but incredibly sloppy from a cybersecurity standpoint, I explained. Audrey secretly executed continuous wire transfers from your joint checking account directly into Brandon's private unlisted accounts. If you look at the compiled transaction ledger, the total amount stolen over the last 36 months exceeds $400,000. The number hung in the air like a physical blow. $400,000. Nearly $500,000 of Jamal's grueling labor secretly siphoned away by his own wife. Why? Jamal demanded, his voice cracking with profound grief and escalating fury. He looked at Brandon, who was currently staring at the floor, absolutely terrified to make eye contact with his brother-in-law. "Why would you give him my money?" "Because Brandon is a fake Jamal," I answered for her, ensuring the entire table understood the depth of the betrayal. Brandon is not a successful wealth manager. He does not have a roster of elite clients. His entire career is a fabricated illusion designed to maintain this family's arrogant, old money facade. Audrey stole your surgical earnings and funneled them to her brother so he could lease expensive cars and pretend to be a high-rolling executive. You have been unknowingly funding Brandon's pathetic lifestyle so Patricia and Audrey could continue showing up at this country club pretending they were royalty. The reality of the deception finally shattered the last remaining fragment of Audrey's composure. She erupted into hysterical sobbing. The tears streaming down her face ruined her expensive makeup, leaving dark streaks across her cheeks. She lunged toward Jamal, completely disregarding Gideon's towering presence, and grabbed her husband's suit jacket with both hands. Jamal, please, you have to listen to me, Audrey wept, her voice reaching a shrill, desperate pitch that echoed through the quiet dining room. She is lying. Every single piece of paper in that envelope is a complete fabrication. She is a computer hacker. She owns a digital forensics firm. She has the tools to print out whatever fake bank statements she wants. You cannot believe this garbage. Jamal did not move. He did not pull away from her grasp, but he also did not offer a single ounce of comfort. He just stared at her with hollow, devastated eyes. She is jealous of our perfect marriage? Audrey continued to scream, her gaslighting escalating to a frantic, delusional level. She knows her husband does not love her, so she is trying to destroy our family out of pure envy. She wants to ruin my life because I have everything she could never earn. Look at her, Jamal. She is a manipulative monster trying to tear us apart with forged documents. You know me. You know I would never steal from our children. Please tell her she is a liar. Audrey buried her face in Jamal's chest, crying so loudly that the restaurant manager finally began walking toward our table. She clung to her husband Jamal, desperately hoping that her tears and her pathetic victim routine would completely blind him to the glaring mathematical truth sitting right in front of him. But the hard evidence of the $400,000 theft was already burned into Jamal's brilliant mind, and no amount of hysterical gaslighting was going to erase the fact that his wife had been robbing him blind for 3 straight years. I did not let Audrey's frantic weeping derail the momentum of the truth. I simply shifted my gaze from the hysterical woman clinging to her husband and locked eyes with Brandon. He was still staring at the floor, attempting to make himself as small as possible in his heavy mahogany chair. Brandon, I said, my voice projecting crisp and clear over his sister's pathetic sobs. Minutes ago, you demanded my necklace, claiming Audrey and Jamal were going through a rough patch financially. You had the absolute audacity to lecture me about my duty to support your family. But you left out the part where you caused their financial crisis. Jamal slowly peeled Audrey's clutching fingers off his suit jacket. He pushed her back into her seat without looking at her, his dark eyes now fixed entirely on Brandon. The orthopedic surgeon was putting the pieces together. What did you do with my money? Brandon Jamal asked. His voice was no longer a loud, commanding rumble. It was a terrifying, icy whisper that promised immediate and severe consequences. I answered for my cowardly husband. He did not put your surgical earnings into a safe, high-yield savings account, Jamal, I explained, tapping the 4th page of the forensic packet. He did not purchase real estate. Brandon took your $400,000 and poured it directly into a stock market sinkhole. Brandon wanted to prove to his mother and to his wealthy country club peers that he was a financial genius. So instead of building a legitimate portfolio, he took your stolen money and treated the stock market like a reckless, high-stakes casino. I flipped the page of the forensic report so Jamal could see the glaring red negative numbers. Brandon engaged in highly leveraged day trading. He bought incredibly risky options contracts on margin betting, massive sums on volatile tech stocks, and failing crypto startups. He thought he could double your $400,000 overnight and keep the profits for himself while returning the principal. But Brandon is not a financial genius. He is an incompetent, arrogant amateur who has absolutely no idea how market mechanics actually work. The numbers on the page were brutal and undeniable. Every single trade Brandon executed was a spectacular failure. In 36 months, I continued. Brandon systematically obliterated 90% of the capital Audrey wired to him. Out of the $400,000 you earned in the operating room, Jamal, less than $40,000 remains. The rest is completely gone. Vaporized by a man who plays pretend on his computer while lecturing his wife about her actual successful business. Brandon finally looked up, his face a miserable portrait of shame and panic. He opened his mouth, searching for an excuse to confuse the issue. The market was unprecedented, he stammered, his voice cracking pitifully. There were macroeconomic factors outside my control. I was executing a sophisticated hedging strategy that just needed more time to mature. "Shut your mouth," Jamal commanded. The two words cracked like a whip. Brandon snapped his mouth shut, instantly swallowing hard as he shrank back from the sheer, unfiltered fury radiating from his brother-in-law. Jamal stared at the forensic reports, but his eyes were no longer reading the numbers. He was looking back through the last 3 years of his marriage, replaying every argument, every excuse, and every suspicious interaction with his wife. The heavy, crushing weight of the betrayal finally broke through the shock, settling deep into his bones. "It all makes sense now," Jamal said. His voice was hollow, stripped of all its former warmth. He turned his head slowly to look at Audrey, who was weeping into her hands, unable to meet his gaze. "This is why you insisted on managing our household finances from the very beginning. You told me my schedule at the hospital was too demanding. You said you wanted to take the burden off my shoulders so I could focus entirely on my patients." Audrey let out a choked sob, shaking her head frantically, as if she could physically deny the memories he was bringing to light. Jamal ignored her tears. His brilliant analytical mind was mercilessly connecting the dots. "This is why you always changed the subject whenever I asked for the login credentials to our joint savings accounts. You claimed you could not remember the passwords, or that the website was down for maintenance. Every single time I wanted to discuss our children's college funds, you started a massive argument. You accused me of not trusting you. You used my love and my guilt to keep me completely blind to your theft." He looked at the diamond tennis bracelet on her wrist, then at the designer handbag resting on the floor beside her chair. He looked at Patricia, who was still frozen in shock, and then at Brandon, the architect of his financial ruin. The entire picture was finally crystal clear. "You isolated my income," Jamal stated, his voice dropping into a register of pure cold disgust. "You intercepted the money I bled for, and you handed it over to your incompetent brother so this entire fraudulent family could maintain the illusion of wealth. You stole from our children, Audrey. You robbed your own kids of their educational future just so you could drive a luxury car and sit at a VIP table in a country club you do not even belong in." The depth of the betrayal fully hit him. It was not just about the lost $400,000. It was about the daily methodical deception. It was about waking up every morning next to a woman who smiled at him, kissed him goodbye, and then immediately logged onto her computer to steal his life savings to fund her brother's gambling addiction. Jamal realized that his entire marriage was nothing but a calculated financial extraction scheme. The woman he loved had treated him as nothing more than a highly paid mark. Audrey could see the exact moment the light of love and trust completely extinguished in her husband's eyes. Absolute panic consumed her. She launched into a frantic monologue, her words tripping over each other in a desperate bid for survival. She grabbed the sleeves of his expensive suit, her manicured nails digging into the fabric. She claimed she was only trying to help her brother through a temporary rough patch. She swore she was going to pay it all back before Jamal ever noticed the missing capital. She tried to weaponize their children, sobbing hysterically about how a sudden divorce would destroy their perfect family unit. She wept about how much the kids needed their father in the same house, desperately hoping that using his paternal instincts would blind him to the financial crimes she had committed. She reached out again, her hands shaking uncontrollably, trying to force him to look at her with the warmth and devotion he had always freely given her throughout their marriage. Jamal did not move away, but he did not lean in. He let her speak, his face a mask of absolute unyielding stone. He watched her weep, analyzing her frantic tears and contradictory excuses with the cold, clinical detachment of a master surgeon examining a terminal diagnosis. He listened to her leverage the names of their children, understanding now that she had never truly cared about their future, only about maintaining her own fake prestige. When she finally paused to draw a ragged, desperate breath, Jamal delivered a single, devastatingly calm command. "Stop talking, Audrey." The two words were spoken with such quiet, absolute authority that they instantly sucked all the available oxygen out of her lungs. Audrey snapped her mouth shut, her chest heaving with silent, terrified sobs. Jamal slowly raised his left hand. With deliberate, agonizing precision, he gripped the thick gold wedding band resting on his ring finger. He did not rush the motion. He pulled the gold band over his knuckle, physically and symbolically breaking the ultimate bond of their decade-long marriage. He lowered his hand to the mahogany dining table and placed the ring right on top of the forensic financial reports. The heavy gold metal made a dull, final clink against the damning paper. He looked at the ring for a fraction of a second, then shifted his gaze directly to his wife. The sheer disgust radiating from him was palpable and overwhelming. It was not a fiery, out-of-control rage. It was a freezing, absolute, calculated contempt. You do not get to use our innocent children as a human shield to protect yourself from the devastating consequences of your own unchecked greed, Jamal stated. His voice was completely devoid of any previous affection. You used my blood, my sweat, and my countless grueling hours in the operating room to fund a pathetic charade. You chose to subsidize a massive fraud instead of securing the future of the kids you are now crying about. Every time I missed a dinner to perform an emergency surgery, you were transferring my labor into your brother's gambling accounts. He turned his piercing, furious gaze toward Brandon. Brandon shrank back violently in his heavy wooden chair, completely unable to maintain eye contact with the man he had robbed blind. You are an absolute coward, Brandon. Jamal said, his words slicing through the air like a scalpel. You are a weak, arrogant parasite who steals from his own family because you lack the basic competence and work ethic to earn a living on your own. You took my money and you burned it to the ground just so you could walk around this elite country club pretending to be a financial heavyweight. You are an illusion. You are nothing. You have absolutely nothing. Jamal stood up from his chair. His towering frame cast a long, imposing shadow over the table, utterly dwarfing the cowering siblings and their completely horrified mother. He buttoned his suit jacket with mechanical precision, preparing to permanently amputate the diseased limb from his life. Tomorrow morning, at exactly 8 o'clock, Jamal announced, laying out his legal terms with absolute crushing finality. My legal team will be filing emergency court injunctions. I am freezing every single joint banking account we share. I am locking down all remaining financial assets to prevent you from stealing another dime. You will not have access to a single penny of my surgical earnings. I will have a full independent forensic audit conducted on every financial transaction you have made since the day we were married, and my attorneys will be filing for an immediate, highly contested divorce. You are going to face the full legal consequences of this massive theft, Audrey. I will not shield you from the fallout. I will not protect your social standing. You are completely on your own. Audrey let out a guttural, agonizing wail that shattered the quiet atmosphere of the dining room. She collapsed forward over the table, her hands grasping desperately at the empty space where Jamal's hands had been just moments before. She begged him to stop, to reconsider, to think about the massive social scandal this would cause, but her pathetic pleas fell on entirely deaf ears. Jamal had already completely detached himself from her existence. He turned his attention away from the smoking wreckage of his marriage and looked directly at me. The harsh, unforgiving fury in his eyes faded slightly, replaced by a look of profound, solemn respect. We had both been targeted by the exact same predators. We had both been viewed as nothing more than walking, breathing bank accounts by a highly toxic family that despised our incredible work ethic while happily devouring the fruits of our intense labor. Thank you, Olivia, Jamal said, his voice steady, deep, and totally sincere. You did not have to uncover this massive deception. You could have just handled your own personal business and walked away from this table. But you chose to show me the harsh truth, no matter how incredibly painful it was to see. You saved me from spending the rest of my life working myself to death to feed a black hole of greed. I owe you a massive debt of gratitude for opening my eyes. I nodded slowly, acknowledging his immense strength and unyielding dignity. You owe me absolutely nothing, Jamal, I replied softly. You deserve to know exactly who you were married to. Take care of yourself and your kids." Jamal gave me a single deeply respectful nod. He turned his back on the weeping, hysterical mess of his wife, the pale, trembling figure of his defeated brother-in-law, and the utterly destroyed matriarch of the family. He walked away from the table with his broad shoulders squared and his head held exceptionally high. He navigated through the crowded, staring dining room of the Oakwood Country Club with absolute, unmatched dignity. He did not rush his steps. He did not look back to see the destruction. He simply marched out the main double doors and disappeared into the night. He left Audrey wailing hysterically at the table, clutching the golden wedding band he had discarded. Her desperate, broken, utterly humiliating sobs echoed through the upscale restaurant, the sound of a woman who had just realized she had completely irreversibly destroyed her own perfect life. The sound of Audrey wailing hysterically at the table filled the cavernous dining room of the Oakwood Country Club. She clutched the gold wedding band Jamal had left behind, her tears smearing her expensive makeup into dark, ugly streaks across her face. Beside her, Patricia remained completely catatonic. The disgraced matriarch stared blankly at the federal bankruptcy documents, and the black corporate credit card, her mouth hanging slightly open as the catastrophic reality of her shattered social standing finally paralyzed her. The surrounding elite patrons were no longer even pretending to look away. They watched the spectacular collapse of this fraudulent family with unabashed fascination. Amidst this total destruction, I kept my posture perfectly straight, my hands resting calmly on my lap. I watched the scene unfold with the detached precision of a scientist observing a highly volatile chemical reaction. I knew exactly what would happen next. Predators do not simply surrender when they are cornered. When their primary food source is violently ripped away, they immediately turn their sights on the nearest available prey. Brandon had been sitting in terrified silence for the past 10 minutes, utterly humiliated by Jamal's blistering departure and the exposure of his colossal stock market failures. But as he watched his sister's marriage disintegrate and his mother's reputation burn to the ground, a distinct shift occurred in his demeanor. The sheer panic that had previously drained the color from his face began to curdle into a dark, vicious rage. He realized that the stolen funds from Jamal were permanently frozen. The free ride was officially over. His fake career as a wealth manager was dead. He needed a new lifeline, and he needed it immediately. Brandon slowly pushed himself up from his heavy mahogany chair. He did not look at his weeping sister or his paralyzed mother. He locked his furious, bloodshot eyes entirely on me. The pathetic, cowering man vanished, replaced by an aggressive, venomous bully who genuinely believed he still held a trump card. He planted both of his hands firmly on the table, his knuckles turning white as he leaned his upper body across the polished wood, deliberately invading my personal space in an attempt to physically intimidate me. Gideon immediately shifted his weight, his massive frame tensing as he prepared to intercept any sudden physical attack. I raised a single finger, signaling my security chief to hold his position. I wanted Brandon to speak. I wanted him to hang himself with his own words. "You actually think you won tonight?" Brandon spat, his voice dropping into a harsh, trembling sneer. "You think you can just march into my mother's country club, humiliate my entire family, destroy my sister's marriage, and simply walk away completely unscathed? You are absolutely out of your mind, Olivia. You think because you hold the deed to the penthouse and cancel a few credit cards that you hold all the power. You are forgetting one massive, undeniable fact." He paused, his chest heaving as he tried to project an aura of absolute dominance. "We are legally married," he stated, his voice dripping with malicious intent. "And in the eyes of the law, what is yours is mine. I do not care what kind of corporate holding company shell games you played with the real estate. I do not care how many digital forensics reports you print out to impress your little bodyguard. If you think you are going to discard me and leave me with nothing, you are in for the fight of your miserable life." I maintained my icy, unwavering eye contact, allowing him to dig his grave even deeper. "Go on, Brandon," I prompted smoothly. "Tell me exactly how you plan to fight me. I am going to file for a scorched earth divorce first thing tomorrow morning." He threatened, a cruel, arrogant smirk slowly creeping back onto his face. I am going to hire the most vicious, bloodthirsty litigation attorneys in this city. I will drag your name and your company through years of agonizing high-profile court battles. I will demand permanent spousal support to maintain the affluent lifestyle I have grown accustomed to during our marriage. And most importantly, I am coming after your business. You built that little technology company during our marriage, which means I am legally entitled to exactly 50% of every single business asset, client contract, and revenue stream you possess. His sheer ignorance of corporate law and prenuptial asset protection was staggering, but I did not interrupt him. I let him bask in his false sense of legal superiority. I'm going to force a complete liquidation of your agency if I have to. Brandon continued, his voice gaining a sickening level of confidence. I will bleed your corporate accounts dry with endless discovery motions and forensic accounting audits of my own. By the time my lawyers are done with you, you will be begging to give me that penthouse just to make the legal fees stop. You wanted to ruin my life tonight, Olivia. Well, congratulations. You just triggered your own absolute financial destruction. He leaned even closer, the smell of his expensive alcohol-laced breath washing over me. But his threats of a messy divorce were just the appetizer. Brandon was preparing to serve the main course, a desperate act of corporate extortion that he genuinely believed would guarantee his permanent financial security. His smirk widened into a grotesque display of unearned victory. You should have been much more careful about your home office security. Olivia, he whispered, his tone transforming into a venomous, taunting hiss. You thought you were so smart locking that heavy oak door and treating your workspace like some highly classified military vault. You always acted like your precious computer files were top-secret government data. But you severely underestimated me. I am not an idiot. I am a highly skilled financial professional, and I know exactly how to secure my own interests when my partner starts acting suspicious. I kept my facial expression completely blank, though internally a surge of pure calculated anticipation electrified my veins. He was walking directly into the exact trap I had meticulously laid out for him weeks ago. For the last month, Brandon confessed, practically vibrating with arrogant pride, I have been watching you. I noticed you were moving money around and gathering those pathetic little dossiers on my family. So I took proactive measures. While you were sleeping, I bypassed the pathetic electronic keypad on your office door. It was shockingly easy to crack your passcode. Once I was inside, I did not just look around. I accessed your primary desktop computer. I plugged in an external hard drive and I spent hours copying everything. He stood up slightly taller, adjusting his expensive suit jacket, as if he had just pulled off the heist of the century. I have your entire client database, Olivia. He gloated, his eyes gleaming with malicious triumph. I have your financial projections, your proprietary operating procedures, and every single confidential email you have sent for the past 3 years. I hold the absolute key to your entire business empire right in the palm of my hand. I decided to secure my own financial future at your expense, and there is absolutely nothing you can do to stop me. Brandon crossed his arms over his chest, looking down at me with the absolute certainty of a man who believed he had just delivered an inescapable checkmate. He thought his corporate blackmail was flawless. He thought he had successfully outmaneuvered me. He had absolutely no idea that he had just confessed to a multitude of severe federal crimes right in the middle of a crowded restaurant, and I was about to use his arrogant confession to obliterate his existence completely. Brandon leaned even closer, lowering his voice into a theatrical, conspiratorial whisper that he clearly thought sounded incredibly menacing. He genuinely believed he was starring in his own high-stakes corporate espionage thriller, playing the role of a brilliant mastermind who had outmaneuvered a formidable opponent. You really thought I was just sitting around blindly while you plotted against my family, Olivia? He taunted, his eyes wide with manic excitement and unearned confidence. I saw the hidden folders on your desktop. I saw the encrypted directories labeled specifically for your upcoming enterprise software launch. That highly proprietary source code you have been developing for the past 2 years. The intellectual property that your venture capital investors are currently valuing at tens of millions of dollars. I did not just copy it onto a cheap flash drive, Olivia. I executed a flawless, completely untraceable digital extraction right under your nose. Brandon paused to gauge my reaction entirely, misinterpreting my stone-cold silence as absolute paralyzing terror. He puffed out his chest, adjusting his expensive suit cuffs with sickening, arrogant pride. He wanted the wealthy patrons of the Oakwood Country Club to hear his triumph. I transferred every single line of that source code to a highly secure offshore shell company I established in the Cayman Islands. Brandon declared, proudly dropping the name of the notorious tax haven as if it automatically made him a criminal genius. It is completely outside of United States jurisdiction. Your pathetic little tech company cannot touch it. My offshore holding accounts are permanently shielded behind multiple impenetrable layers of corporate anonymity. I hold the absolute keys to your most valuable corporate asset, and it is resting safely on an island where your fancy lawyers have zero legal reach. He paced a short distance beside the table, completely energized by his own perceived brilliance. The wealthy patrons of the club watched him with morbid fascination, captivated by the live corporate blackmail unfolding right beside their expensive steaks and vintage wine. He was putting on a show desperate to repair the massive blow to his ego that Jamal had inflicted just moments ago. "So here are my new terms," Brandon commanded, pointing a rigid, aggressive finger directly at my face. "First, you are going to sign that downtown penthouse over to me. Completely, irrevocably, and legally. You will transfer the property deed from your little holding company directly into my name by tomorrow afternoon. Second, you will establish an irrevocable, fully funded trust to maintain my mother's lifestyle in perpetuity. You will ensure she never has to give up her country club membership, her luxury cars, or her elite social standing ever again. And third, you will agree to a massive, uncontested alimony settlement that accurately reflects the extreme luxury I have generously provided you during this marriage." I continued to watch him, my face a mask of absolute chilling serenity, while internally I was marveling at the sheer breathtaking magnitude of his stupidity. He was confessing to federal crimes with the enthusiasm of a man bragging about a golf score. "If you refuse even a single one of these demands," Brandon threatened, slamming his fist onto the heavy mahogany table for dramatic emphasis, "I will immediately auction off your proprietary source code to your top 3 biggest competitors. I have already drafted the anonymous communications. With a single click of a button, your corporate rivals will have total unrestricted access to your intellectual property. Your upcoming software launch will be entirely worthless. Your investors will instantly pull their funding, your company will completely collapse, and you will be facing a mountain of shareholder lawsuits that will utterly bankrupt you for the rest of your natural life." The sound of Brandon's extortion seemed to act as a magical, revitalizing elixir for his mother. Patricia, who had been sitting frozen in a state of absolute catatonic shock since I revealed her humiliating bankruptcy to the entire dining room, suddenly gasped and sat bolt upright. The color began to flood rapidly back into her pale, tear-stained cheeks. The realization that her golden son had supposedly outsmarted the woman who had just publicly ruined her brought an instantaneous, miraculous recovery to the disgraced matriarch. Patricia grabbed a linen cloth napkin and wiped the dark, smeared mascara from under her eyes. She let out a breathless, triumphant laugh that sounded like grating metal scraping against stone. She pushed herself up from the table, smoothing out the wrinkles in her designer dress, and walked around to stand directly beside Brandon. She wrapped her arm proudly around his shoulders, projecting a united, victorious front to the watching elite crowd. "You really thought you could outsmart us, didn't you?" Patricia sneered, her voice instantly regaining that familiar, grating tone of aristocratic superiority she used to terrorize service workers. "You thought you could just march in here, humiliate me in front of my peers, and destroy my family with your little printed spreadsheets. You severely underestimated the powerful bloodline you married into, Olivia. My son is a brilliant financial mind. His business acumen is infinitely superior to your pathetic computer tricks." Patricia looked down at me, her eyes blazing with renewed venomous arrogance. She genuinely believed that Brandon's amateur extortion plot had successfully cornered a national cybersecurity expert. She thought the tables had permanently turned in their favor, completely blind to the trap closing around them. "You finally lost Olivia," Patricia gloated, leaning over the table to make sure her vicious words pierced me. "You completely overplayed your hand. You brought this entire spectacular disaster upon yourself by refusing to just hand over a simple piece of jewelry. If you had just shown some basic respect and obedience to your betters, you could have kept your little company intact. But now my son holds your entire future right in the palm of his hands. You are going to sign over that luxury penthouse, you are going to fully fund my bank accounts, and then you are going to crawl back to whatever miserable, impoverished hole you crawled out of." She patted Brandon's cheek affectionately, looking at him as if he were a conquering hero who had just returned from a glorious battle. "I raised a brilliant, ruthless man," she announced loudly to the surrounding tables, desperately attempting to salvage her shattered public image by broadcasting her son's supposed victory. "He knows exactly how to protect his family's legacy from greedy, manipulative outsiders who try to steal what rightfully belongs to us." I let the final echo of Patricia's ridiculous, triumphant declaration fade completely into the ambient noise of the country club dining room. I did not drop my gaze. I did not tremble. I did not reach for a napkin to wipe away imaginary tears of defeat. Instead, I looked at the two of them standing there, puffed up with the false, intoxicating confidence of amateur thieves who genuinely believed they had just successfully robbed a heavily fortified bank. And then I laughed. It was not a forced, polite chuckle. It was a genuine, melodic, and absolutely chilling laugh that bubbled up from the very bottom of my chest. The sound of my genuine amusement sliced through the heavy, suffocating tension of the room like a freshly sharpened blade. I tilted my head back, letting the pure, unadulterated comedy of their profound stupidity wash over me. The surrounding elite patrons who had been bracing themselves for a pathetic display of submission on my part exchanged deeply confused glances. Patricia's smug, victorious smile instantly faltered. Her hands dropped to her sides, her posture stiffening as the sound of my laughter completely shattered the illusion of her dominance. She looked at Brandon, searching his face for reassurance, but Brandon was already taking a small, involuntary step backward. He recognized that laugh. It was the exact same laugh I used when I dismantled hostile negotiation tactics in corporate boardrooms. "What is so funny?" Patricia demanded, her voice losing its aristocratic edge and pitching upward into a nervous, shrill squawk. "You are facing absolute financial ruin, Olivia. My son just outsmarted you. There is absolutely nothing funny about your impending bankruptcy." I slowly leaned forward, resting my forearms gracefully on the polished mahogany table. I stopped laughing, but the cold, predatory amusement remained completely visible in my eyes. I looked directly at my husband, watching the microscopic tremors beginning to form in his hands. "Brandon," I said, my voice carrying a quiet, terrifying authority that commanded the absolute attention of every single person within earshot. "For the entirety of our marriage, you and your mother have operated under a remarkably persistent and profoundly insulting delusion regarding my career. Because I do not wear flashy designer suits to an office building, and because I actually understand how a server network operates, you convinced yourselves that I was just some low-level IT worker. You literally called me a computer repair girl not 20 minutes ago." I paused, letting the silence stretch just long enough to ensure my next words would hit with maximum devastating impact. "I do not fix broken laptops, Brandon," I stated, enunciating every single syllable with razor-sharp precision. "I am the founder and chief executive officer of Vanguard Digital Defense. We are one of the premier cybersecurity and digital forensics firms in the United States. My company secures the encrypted networks of multinational banks, defense contractors, and federal intelligence agencies. I employ dozens of the most ruthless, brilliant ethical hackers and security architects on the planet. I build impenetrable digital fortresses for a living." Brandon stared at me, the color draining so rapidly from his face that his skin took on a sickly, translucent hue. His mouth opened, but his vocal cords entirely failed to produce a sound. The arrogant corporate raider persona he had projected just moments ago completely evaporated, leaving behind a terrified, incompetent amateur who was slowly realizing he had just walked into a minefield blindfolded. You honestly believed you could bypass the security protocols on my home office network? I continued, my tone dripping with icy, clinical condescension. You thought you were a mastermind because you guessed the physical passcode on a heavy oak door. Brandon, the electronic lock on that door is a decorative prop. The actual security perimeter begins the exact second a device connects to my local network environment. Patricia looked frantically between her son and me, her limited understanding of technology severely hindering her ability to grasp the magnitude of the disaster unfolding. Brandon, what is she talking about? Patricia hissed, grabbing his arm and shaking it. Tell her to shut up. Tell her you have the files. He does have the files, Patricia. I confirmed smoothly, keeping my eyes locked on my husband's horrified face. He absolutely transferred a massive data payload to a shell company in the Cayman Islands. But he did not steal my proprietary source code. He did not steal the intellectual property for my upcoming enterprise software launch. My actual source code is housed on a heavily air-gapped server in a subterranean biometric vault across the country. It is never under any circumstances stored on a local desktop computer in a residential penthouse. I watched Brandon's chest heave as he struggled to draw oxygen into his panicking lungs. The realization was hitting him with the brute force of a physical blow. So what did you steal, Brandon? I asked, tilting my head mockingly. I will tell you exactly what you stole. You stole a honeypot. I spoke clearly, ensuring the wealthy audience understood the precise mechanics of his absolute failure. For the past month, I noticed your clumsy, pathetic attempts to snoop through my network traffic. You left digital fingerprints everywhere. You were about as stealthy as a bulldozer driving through a glass house. So instead of locking you out and causing a suspicious argument, my team and I decided to leave the front door wide open. We created a beautifully labeled, highly enticing dummy directory on my desktop. We titled it with the exact project names we knew you were looking for. We wrapped it in a superficial layer of basic encryption just to make you feel like you had really accomplished something when you cracked it. Brandon's knees buckled slightly. He gripped the back of his heavy dining chair to keep himself from collapsing onto the floor. His breathing was rapid and shallow. But that directory did not contain software. I explained, delivering the technical reality with surgical precision. It contained a highly reactive, custom-built military-grade tracking payload. It is a specialized piece of forensic malware designed exclusively to hunt down corporate espionage vectors. The exact second you plugged your external hard drive into my computer, you infected your own device. And the exact second you initiated that wire transfer to your offshore shell company, you carried my tracking beacon directly past the Cayman Islands' jurisdictional firewalls and planted it right into the heart of your own secret servers. Patricia let out a small, confused whimper. She did not understand the terminology, but she perfectly understood the look of absolute soul-crushing defeat radiating from her son's entire body. You did not secure your financial future tonight, Brandon, I concluded, my voice dropping to a final lethal register. You just handed the CEO of a national cybersecurity firm a direct, unhindered backdoor access tunnel into every single hidden account, illegal wire transfer, and fraudulent shell company you have ever created. You swallowed the bait whole, and you dragged the hook deep into your own stomach. You are not a brilliant mastermind holding my company hostage. You are a profoundly stupid man who just delivered all the evidence of his own crimes directly to his executioner. The dining room of the Oakwood Country Club was dead silent. The live corporate blackmail had not just failed, it had been meticulously, flawlessly reversed, trapping the predator in a cage of his own making. Brandon stared at me, his eyes wide with a pure, unadulterated terror that finally matched the severity of the crimes he had just committed. The absolute terror in Brandon's eyes was a magnificent sight to behold. The smug, untouchable corporate raider persona he had projected just moments ago had completely evaporated, leaving behind a hollow, trembling shell of a man who suddenly realized he was standing at the edge of an inescapable abyss. He opened his mouth desperately, searching for a witty comeback or a legal loophole, but his vocal cords refused to cooperate. His jaw worked soundlessly. A thick bead of cold sweat formed at his hairline and tracked slowly down his pale temple, disappearing into the collar of his expensive, custom-tailored Italian suit. He gripped the back of his heavy dining chair so tightly that his knuckles turned stark white, using the furniture as a physical crutch to keep his buckling knees from giving out entirely. Patricia, utterly bewildered by the highly technical execution of her son's downfall, grabbed Brandon's forearm and shook it violently. "Brandon, say something," she demanded, her voice a shrill, panicked whisper that echoed in the deadly quiet of the country club dining room. "Tell her she is bluffing. Tell her you still have the upper hand. You cannot just stand there and let this computer girl talk to you like this. Do something right now." But Brandon could not do a single thing. He could not even look at his mother. His gaze remained welded to my face, filled with a horrified, dawning comprehension of the catastrophic mistake he had made. He finally understood that he had not hacked my system. I had cordially invited him in, handed him a loaded weapon, and quietly watched as he pointed it directly at his own head. "I am afraid Brandon is currently out of options, Patricia," I stated, my voice projecting with a calm, surgical precision that commanded the attention of every single elite patron eavesdropping on our table. "He cannot spin his way out of a digital snare that has already snapped shut around his ankles. But the absolute best part of this entire evening is that my digital honeypot was only the first half of the trap." I raised my right hand slowly and gracefully. I brought my fingertips up to my collarbone and gently touched the deep blue sapphire and diamond necklace resting against my skin. The exact same piece of jewelry that Patricia had viciously demanded I hand over to her daughter. The very necklace she had tried to physically rip from my throat before Gideon intervened. "You were incredibly determined to steal this necklace tonight, Patricia," I remarked, tracing the intricate silver setting with my index finger. "You claimed it was wasted on me. You insisted it belonged on the neck of a high society woman like Audrey to impress her wealthy friends at a hospital gala. Brandon even had the sheer audacity to dismiss it as a shiny trinket to keep me distracted. It is profoundly poetic that you coveted this specific item so aggressively because you had absolutely no idea what you were actually trying to grab." I dropped my hand back to my lap, keeping my eyes locked on my trembling husband. "This necklace is indeed a cherished family heirloom," I explained smoothly. "But a few months ago, when I first began suspecting that you were secretly funneling Jamal's surgical earnings into your own private gambling accounts, I handed this lovely piece of jewelry over to the hardware engineering division of Vanguard Digital Defense. My top technicians spent 3 days meticulously retrofitting the heavy silver casing that holds the central sapphire." Brandon let out a strangled, breathless gasp. His eyes darted to the necklace, a new wave of absolute dread washing over his features. They hollowed out the back of the pendant and installed a state-of-the-art military-grade micro-recording device, I revealed, letting the devastating truth sink deep into his panicking mind. "It is equipped with an advanced noise-canceling audio processor and a highly powerful cellular transmitter. It does not just store audio on a tiny internal memory chip, Brandon. It streams a live, fully encrypted, high-definition audio feed directly to my company's secure servers in real time." The silence in the Oakwood Country Club was absolute. The wealthy onlookers, the waitstaff, even the country club manager standing near the entrance, were completely paralyzed by the sheer cinematic magnitude of the revelation. They realized they were not just watching a marital dispute, they were witnessing a live sting operation. "Every single word you have spoken tonight," I continued, methodically driving the final nails into his coffin. "Your aggressive demands for my property, your vicious threats of a scorched earth divorce, your proud, detailed confession of bypassing my home office security, your admission of copying what you believe to be my proprietary enterprise source code, and most importantly, your blatant attempt at corporate extortion when you threatened to sell my intellectual property to my biggest competitors, unless I signed over my real estate and funded your mother's lavish lifestyle. Every single syllable of that malicious blackmail has been captured, recorded, and permanently archived. Patricia let out a faint, reedy wheeze, stumbling backward until the edge of the dining table caught her hips. She covered her mouth with both hands, staring at the glittering blue jewel as if it were a ticking bomb. She realized that her own arrogant cheering and prompting had only helped secure her son's grim fate. "You see, Brandon?" I elaborated, my tone shifting into the cold, factual cadence of a seasoned legal expert. "Digital forensic evidence is incredibly powerful. The server logs, the malicious payload tracking, and the offshore routing numbers are all fantastic tools for proving that a data breach occurred. But expensive defense attorneys are incredibly slippery. They will stand up in a federal courtroom and argue that you simply clicked on the wrong link, or that a third-party hacker remotely accessed your device and framed you. They will argue a lack of intent. They will claim it was all a terrible, unfortunate accident." I leaned forward slightly, closing the distance between us, ensuring he felt the crushing weight of his absolute defeat. To guarantee a federal conviction, I needed to establish intent beyond a reasonable shadow of a doubt. I needed undeniable, bulletproof proof of criminal intent. I needed the federal prosecutors to know exactly why you stole the data, where you sent it, and what you plan to do with it. I offered him a chilling, victorious smile. "And you just handed me the final, irrefutable piece of the puzzle on a silver platter." You could not resist the urge to brag. Your massive, fragile ego demanded that you gloat about your supposed brilliance in front of your mother and all these wealthy strangers. You explicitly outlined your extortion demands. You proudly named the Cayman Islands as your offshore haven. You verbally verified every single element of the crime with your own voice. Brandon slumped forward, bracing both hands on the table, as if his spine had completely dissolved. He was hyperventilating now, his chest rising and falling in rapid, shallow bursts. The arrogant mastermind who had threatened to destroy my business just 5 minutes ago was completely gone. In his place was a broken, terrified criminal who had just realized he had signed his own federal indictment. Right now, at this exact second, I concluded, my voice ringing with total, uncompromising authority. A team of my senior threat analysts is sitting in a secure control room analyzing the audio file you just so generously provided. They are packaging your recorded confession alongside the forensic data trace from the honeypot payload you downloaded. You thought you were executing a flawless corporate takeover tonight, Brandon. But the only thing you successfully executed was your own permanent destruction. The trap is completely closed, and there is absolutely no way out. I let the absolute finality of that statement hang in the chilled air of the dining room. Brandon looked as if the gravity in the room had suddenly multiplied by 10, pulling him relentlessly toward the polished hardwood floor. His breath came in ragged, shallow gasps, his chest heaving violently beneath his tailored shirt. The elite country club members at the surrounding tables sat entirely paralyzed, their expensive meals growing cold as they witnessed the spectacular surgical dismantling of a man who thought he could outsmart a cybersecurity chief executive. But I was not finished. A true digital forensics expert does not just identify a breach. We catalog every single violation for the prosecution, ensuring the legal trap is completely inescapable. "You see, Brandon?" I continued, my voice taking on the sharp, precise cadence of a federal prosecutor delivering an opening statement. "You did not just snoop through a spouse's laptop. When you deliberately bypassed my security protocols to access a device owned by Vanguard Digital Defense, you committed a direct, undeniable violation of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. That is a severe federal crime, carrying a maximum sentence of 10 years in a federal penitentiary for a first offense." Patricia let out a strangled, pathetic whimper, her hands flying up to cover her mouth. She stared at her son, the golden boy she had relentlessly praised, suddenly visualizing him wearing a prison uniform instead of his custom Italian suit. "But you did not stop there," I added, stepping slightly closer to the heavy mahogany table, forcing him to meet my unwavering gaze. Gideon remained a towering, silent sentinel right behind me, projecting an aura of absolute protection that kept the panicking family glued to their seats. When you packaged what you believed to be my proprietary enterprise software and initiated a data transfer to an unauthorized offshore entity, you triggered the Economic Espionage Act. You explicitly stated your intention to sell stolen trade secrets to my corporate competitors for your own financial gain. That adds another 15 years and a potential $5 million fine. And let us not forget the extortion you just proudly recorded on my necklace, demanding a luxury penthouse and lifetime alimony in exchange for the stolen data. That falls squarely under federal blackmail statutes. Brandon shook his head weakly from side to side. He tried to form words, perhaps a desperate apology, perhaps a pathetic plea for mercy, but his vocal cords were completely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of the prison time I was casually calculating in front of his wealthy peers. The most breathtaking part of your entire operation, Brandon, was your choice of weaponry. I stated, my tone shifting from legal analysis to utter professional disbelief. I watched the network routing logs in real time as your transfer initiated. You did not use an untraceable burner laptop. You did not use a heavily encrypted virtual private network from an anonymous public coffee shop. You executed a massive international data exfiltration using the highly regulated, heavily monitored servers of your own wealth management firm. The realization hit him like a physical strike. His eyes bulged and his hands flew to his head, grasping his hair in pure, unadulterated panic. Did you honestly think a premier financial institution would not notice a massive encrypted data packet leaving their secure network and traveling directly to a known tax haven in the Cayman Islands? I asked, mocking his catastrophic lack of basic technological understanding. Financial institutions are governed by incredibly strict federal compliance regulations. By utilizing your employer's infrastructure to execute your little heist, you bypassed their internal firewalls. You triggered automated alerts for international money laundering and corporate espionage across multiple federal monitoring systems. Patricia grabbed Brandon's arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging deep into his suit jacket. "Brandon, tell me this is not happening," she begged, her voice a shrill, frantic hiss that carried across the quiet dining room. "Tell me you did not use your office computer. Tell me you did not ruin your career." He could not answer her. He was completely hyperventilating, his eyes darting around the country club, as if expecting federal agents to drop from the vaulted ceilings at any second. He finally understood that he had not just attacked his wife. He had dragged his highly prestigious, heavily regulated employer directly into a massive federal cybercrime investigation. You compromised a licensed wealth management network to facilitate international data theft. I clarified, ensuring the wealthy executives dining at the surrounding tables fully understood the danger Brandon posed to their own financial portfolios. The Securities and Exchange Commission and the Federal Bureau of Investigation do not treat unauthorized offshore data transfers lightly. You weaponized your firm's infrastructure, Brandon. You turned their secure corporate network into an active federal crime scene. Right on cue, the subtle rhythmic vibration of my phone buzzed against my leg from inside my designer bag. I did not rush. I maintained my perfectly composed posture, holding Brandon's terrified gaze for another punishing second before reaching down to retrieve the device. The screen illuminated, displaying a high-priority encrypted message from my senior incident response director. I unlocked the screen, reading the brief, highly anticipated text message. A slow, glacial smile spread across my face. It was the smile of a chess player watching the opposing king finally topple over on the board. I looked back up at my husband, whose entire existence was currently dangling by a single rapidly fraying thread. "I just received confirmation from my team," I announced, my voice slicing through the heavy, suffocated silence of the Oakwood Country Club. "When your unauthorized transfer triggered those federal flags, my cybersecurity analysts immediately contacted the chief compliance officer at your wealth management firm. We provided them with the digital forensics, the exact timestamps, and the specific routing protocols you used to exfiltrate the data." Brandon let out a low, agonizing groan. He slumped forward, burying his face in his hands completely and utterly broken. As we speak, I continued delivering the absolute crushing finality of his professional destruction. Your employer's internal security team, working in direct coordination with my digital forensics experts, has fully locked down your office. They have physically seized your desktop computer, confiscated your company-issued mobile devices, and permanently revoked all of your building access credentials. Your corporate email has been deactivated. Your client portfolios have been frozen and reassigned to other managers pending a full federal investigation. Patricia let out a breathless, devastated sob, finally releasing her grip on her son's arm and sinking back into her heavy mahogany chair. The illusion of her golden child, the prestigious wealth manager who elevated their family name, was permanently obliterated. Your career in the financial sector is officially and completely over, Brandon. I stated, my tone devoid of any sympathy. You will never manage another portfolio. You will never hold a financial license again. You are entirely radioactive to any reputable firm in this country. You tried to burn my company to the ground to secure a permanent life of luxury, but you only succeeded in completely and irreversibly incinerating your own future. The crushing weight of his absolute professional annihilation anchored Brandon to his chair. His breathing was so shallow, he appeared to be suffocating in plain sight. His eyes locked onto the pristine white tablecloth as if searching for a trap door. Patricia sat frozen beside him, her mouth hanging slightly ajar, her manicured hands trembling violently in her lap. The illusion of her prestigious family had been ground into fine dust and scattered to the wind. The silence enveloping our VIP table was heavy and incredibly profound. The surrounding elite patrons of the Oakwood Country Club were captivated by the catastrophic implosion of the man they had once considered a peer. The soft jazz music piping through the ceiling speakers sounded entirely absurd against the backdrop of a ruined life. Then the ambient warm lighting of the dining room shifted abruptly. The grand floor-to-ceiling glass windows lining the far wall of the country club overlooked the manicured entrance driveway. Suddenly, the darkness of the evening outside was violently pierced by a rhythmic strobing effect. Frantic flashes of brilliant red and blue light began bouncing off the thick glass panes, casting long, erratic shadows across the expensive mahogany tables and crystal chandeliers. The reflections swept across the faces of the wealthy diners, instantly snapping their attention away from our table and toward the front entrance. The visual disruption was jarring, entirely foreign to the meticulously controlled, serene environment of the club. Murmurs of confusion and rising alarm rippled through the dining room. People shifted in their wooden chairs, craning their necks to see past the velvet drapes. The flashing red and blue lights painted Brandon's pale, terrified face in alternating hues of panic. He knew exactly what those lights meant. The tracking beacon I had allowed him to steal had provided a direct, undeniable digital roadmap for law enforcement to follow. The tension escalated from curiosity to absolute suffocating dread. The elite sanctuary was no longer secure. The heavy, ornate double doors leading into the main dining hall swung open with a forceful thud that made several nearby patrons jump in their seats. The general manager of the Oakwood Country Club practically stumbled into the room. His face was flushed a deep, unhealthy crimson, and a visible sheen of cold sweat coated his forehead. He looked entirely terrified, his eyes darting frantically around the room until they locked onto our central VIP table. His usual confident stride was replaced by a rushed, panicked shuffle. Following closely behind the terrified manager were two imposing figures who disrupted the aesthetic of the high society gathering. They were tall, intimidating, broad-shouldered men dressed in incredibly sharp, unassuming dark suits that absolutely screamed government authority. They moved with a predatory, synchronized efficiency, completely ignoring the luxurious decor and the staring billionaires. Coiled, transparent earpieces disappeared behind their collars, and heavy gold shields were clipped to their belts, flashing under the crystal chandeliers. They walked like men who owned the room the moment they stepped inside. The club manager reached our table first, completely out of breath. He wrung his hands together, looking between Patricia, Brandon, and me with sheer panic. He opened his mouth to speak, but his voice cracked, failing to produce a coherent sentence. He was deeply terrified of offending his highly prestigious elite members, but he was entirely powerless to stop the fast federal intrusion that was marching straight across his pristine dining room floor. He stepped aside, hastily clearing the path as the two agents closed the final distance to our table. Patricia let out a sharp, involuntary gasp, pressing her back firmly against her chair as the men approached. Her eyes were fixed on the gold badges clipped to their waistbands. The reality of her son's amateur corporate espionage was no longer just a digital concept or a verbal threat delivered across a dinner table. It had manifested into a physical, terrifying reality standing right in front of her. The consequences of Brandon's unchecked arrogance and greed had finally arrived, and they wore dark suits and carried absolute federal authority. Gideon, maintaining his position right behind my chair, subtly shifted his stance. He recognized fellow professionals, and a silent mutual understanding passed between my security chief and the approaching agents. The agents completely bypassed the trembling club manager and Patricia's horrified gaze. They stepped directly up to Brandon, positioning themselves on either side of his heavy dining chair, effectively trapping him in place. The illusion of the Oakwood Country Club as an untouchable exclusive sanctuary died in that exact moment. The wealthy elite patrons who had spent the entire evening pretending to focus on their filet mignons while secretly eavesdropping on our confrontation completely dropped their polite pretense. Silver forks clattered onto china plates. Expensive wine glasses were lowered to the tables. Every single head in the massive, brilliantly illuminated dining room turned to openly stare at the unprecedented, catastrophic spectacle unfolding right before them. The high society crowd watched in absolute mesmerized shock as the impenetrable bubble of their wealth and status was effortlessly pierced by federal law enforcement. Brandon remained slumped in his chair, paralyzed by a fear so profound it seemed to stop his heart entirely. He did not attempt to stand. He did not speak. He just stared blankly at the dark suit jacket of the agent standing closest to him. Brandon, the lead agent, stated, his voice a deep, resonant baritone that carried easily across the deadly silent dining room. "We are special agents with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We need you to stand up and step away from the table immediately." The words echoed through the room, cementing the absolute finality of his ruin. The reality check was absolute and brutal. There was no negotiating. There was no leveraging his mother's fake social standing to make the problem disappear into thin air tonight. He had committed severe federal cybercrimes, and the bill had just come due in the most public, humiliating manner entirely possible. The lead agent did not repeat his command. He simply reached out with a large, calloused hand and gripped Brandon firmly by the bicep, hauling my husband up from the heavy mahogany dining chair. Brandon's legs were practically useless. He swayed on his feet, his expensive leather shoes sliding awkwardly against the polished floor. He looked like a puppet whose strings had just been violently severed. "Brandon, you are under arrest for multiple federal violations," the agent stated, his voice a steady, rhythmic drone that offered absolutely zero room for negotiation. The charges include federal wire fraud, unauthorized access to protected networks under the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, and international corporate espionage. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. The Miranda rights echoed through the silent, opulent dining room of the Oakwood Country Club. The wealthy patrons watching the spectacle sat in stunned, breathless anticipation. Brandon's eyes darted frantically around the room, seeking a friendly face, a sympathetic ear, or a magical escape hatch that simply did not exist. The crushing reality of the federal charges finally penetrated his thick skull, and his arrogant facade shattered into a million pathetic pieces. "Wait, this is a massive mistake," Brandon stammered, his voice cracking into a high, desperate whine. He held his hands up defensively, palms facing the agents, as if he could physically push the federal charges away. "You do not understand. This is just a huge misunderstanding between a husband and a wife. We are legally married. You cannot arrest a man for looking at his own wife's computer files. We share everything. We share all our assets. It is a domestic dispute, not a federal crime. He turned his terrified, pleading eyes toward me. He actually expected me to save him. After threatening to destroy my business, after trying to extort me for a luxury penthouse, and after attempting to steal my intellectual property to fund his mother's fake high society lifestyle, he genuinely believed I would step in and call off the FBI. Olivia, tell them, he begged, his voice dripping with pathetic desperation. Tell them we were just having a fight. Tell them I had permission to use your network. Please. Olivia, tell them to let me go. I did not move a single muscle. I sat perfectly still in my chair, my posture immaculate, my expression a mask of absolute freezing indifference. I simply stared at him, allowing my silence to serve as the final, devastating answer to his pathetic pleas. I had built the trap, I had watched him walk into it, and I was entirely content to watch the steel jaws snap shut around his ankles. The federal agents completely ignored his frantic excuses. They had executed hundreds of high-profile white-collar arrests, and they were entirely immune to the panicked bargaining of a cornered criminal. Sir, turn around and place your hands behind your back, the second agent commanded, stepping behind Brandon with practiced, fluid efficiency. Brandon did not comply immediately. He continued to stammer, his words tumbling over each other in a nonsensical stream of financial jargon and marital excuses. The second agent did not wait for permission. He grabbed Brandon's wrists with a forceful, uncompromising grip, twisting his arms firmly behind his back. The sharp, unmistakable sound of heavy steel ratcheting shut cut through the quiet dining room. The metal handcuffs clicked securely around Brandon's wrists, locking him into a physical reality he could no longer deny or manipulate. The cold steel contrasted sharply against the cuffs of his custom-tailored Italian suit, a stark visual representation of his spectacular fall from grace. The sound of the handcuffs locking was the exact catalyst that finally shattered Patricia's catatonic state. The disgraced matriarch who had spent the entire evening demanding my jewelry and proclaiming her untouchable aristocratic status suddenly snapped. The sight of her golden boy, her prestigious wealth manager's son, standing in the middle of her exclusive country club wearing federal handcuffs, completely broke her fragile grip on reality. Patricia let out a guttural, agonizing scream that tore through the elegant dining room. It was not a refined gasp of shock. It was the raw, animalistic wail of a woman watching her entire fraudulent empire burn to ashes. She pushed herself up from the table, but her legs completely gave out beneath her. She collapsed heavily onto the expensive marble floor, her designer dress bunching up around her knees in an undignified, humiliating heap. She did not care about the stares of the elite patrons anymore. She did not care about her meticulously crafted social standing. The sheer terror of losing her son to a federal penitentiary and losing her financial lifeline to my bank accounts drove her into a state of absolute unhinged desperation. Patricia crawled across the polished floor, her hands scrambling over the marble tiles until she reached my chair. She lunged forward and grabbed the hem of my black evening gown with both of her trembling hands. Her knuckles were white, her grip desperate and bruising. She tilted her head back, looking up at me with a face completely ruined by running mascara and streaming tears. "Olivia, please, you have to stop this!" Patricia begged, her voice a ragged, hysterical sob. "You have the money. You have the power to make this go away. Pay the bail. Call your lawyers and tell them to drop the charges. I am begging you, please do not let them take my son away. He is a good boy. He just made a stupid mistake. You cannot let him go to a federal prison." I looked down at the woman kneeling on the floor at my feet. This was the same woman who had relentlessly mocked my background, who had called me a computer repair girl, and who had violently demanded I hand over my deceased mother's sapphire necklace just an hour ago. Now she was groveling on the ground, clinging to the fabric of my dress like a desperate drowning sailor clinging to a life raft. "I will do anything you want." Patricia sobbed, her tears staining the expensive fabric of my gown. "I will never insult you again. I will never ask for your jewelry. I will be a good mother-in-law from now on." I promise you, Olivia, I will treat you with the respect you deserve. Just please write a check. Call off these agents. Save my family. I am on my knees begging you for mercy." Her pathetic groveling promises echoed in the quiet space, a humiliating display of total submission. She was offering to change her entire personality, offering to play the role of the loving mother-in-law, entirely out of a desperate transactional need to save her own skin. She did not feel a single ounce of genuine remorse for the years of emotional abuse she had inflicted upon me. She was simply trying to negotiate a new deal, now that her leverage was completely gone. I looked at her tear-streaked face, her trembling hands, and the absolute terror in her eyes. I felt no pity. I felt no compassion. I felt nothing but the profound, icy satisfaction of a woman who had meticulously engineered the perfect, inescapable downfall of her greatest enemies. The tables had not just turned, they had been completely obliterated. The desperate clutching fingers of the woman who had spent years trying to make me feel entirely worthless pawed frantically at the air. Patricia was sobbing uncontrollably, her tears leaving dark, ruined stains on the expensive silk fabric of my evening gown. She genuinely believed that if she groveled hard enough, if she put on a pathetic enough display of absolute submission, I would magically pull out my corporate checkbook and erase the devastating federal crimes her son had just proudly confessed to committing. She thought my immense wealth made me a convenient savior, completely ignoring the massive fact that my wealth was the exact target they had all conspired to steal tonight. With a slow, deliberate, and utterly graceful motion, I took a single step backward. The fine fabric of my dress slipped smoothly out of Patricia's frantic, trembling grasp. She let out a sharp gasp, reaching forward again, her hands grasping wildly at the empty space where I had just been standing. She never made contact. Before Patricia could even attempt to close the newly created distance between us, Gideon moved. My security chief did not rush, nor did he display any aggressive hostility. He simply executed a flawless professional maneuver, stepping smoothly and silently right in front of me. His massive, broad-shouldered frame instantly created an impenetrable, solid physical barrier between my pristine personal space and the weeping, hysterical woman thrashing on the floor. Gideon looked down at Patricia with an expression of absolute stone-cold indifference. He did not issue a verbal command, but the sheer physical reality of his imposing presence delivered an undeniable message. Her access to me was permanently revoked. She was no longer permitted to touch me, speak to me, or even look at me without navigating a wall of highly trained executive protection. Patricia slumped forward onto the expensive marble tiles, her palms slapping the floor in a gesture of total, catastrophic defeat. She stared up at Gideon's polished leather shoes, her chest heaving as she finally realized that her pathetic performance had completely failed to move me. The elite patrons of the Oakwood Country Club watched in absolute silence, completely mesmerized by the dramatic, unyielding rejection of their former peer. I stood safely behind Gideon, looking at the broken, miserable remnants of the family I had married into. I did not feel a single ounce of guilt for the absolute destruction I had orchestrated tonight. I felt a profound, chilling sense of total vindication. I stepped slightly to the side, just enough to ensure Patricia had a clear, unobstructed view of my face, as I delivered the final fatal blow to her entire existence. "Patricia," I said, my voice echoing clearly and firmly across the deadly quiet dining room. It carried the precise, uncompromising authority of a judge delivering a final verdict. "You spent the last several years demanding my absolute submission. You paraded around this exclusive club boasting about your fake aristocratic lineage while funding your entire existence with my hard-earned money. You belittled my background. You mocked my career. You looked your wealthy friends in the eye and proudly called me a useless, uneducated computer repair girl." Patricia squeezed her eyes shut, fresh tears spilling over her eyelashes as my words mercilessly dismantled her false reality. She shook her head weakly, but she could not offer a single word of defense to counter the massive truth. Well, you were entirely wrong about me, Patricia. I continued, ensuring every single wealthy executive and socialite in the room heard the absolute truth of my identity. I am not a computer repair girl. I am the architect of your complete, inescapable ruin. I built a digital fortress that your arrogant, incompetent son tried to break into, and I sat back and watched as he completely destroyed his own life. You brought this entire spectacular disaster upon yourselves. You wanted to play high-stakes corporate games with a woman you fundamentally underestimated, and tonight, you officially lost everything. I paused, letting the devastating reality of my statement sink deep into her panicking mind. I formally and permanently sever all ties with this fraudulent toxic family, I declared, sealing their fate. You will never see me again. You will never have access to my bank accounts, my properties, or my company. You are completely, utterly cut off. You are dead to me, Patricia. I shifted my gaze past the sobbing woman on the floor and looked directly at Brandon. The federal agents had secured his wrists tightly in heavy steel handcuffs. He was trembling so violently that the agents had to physically support his weight by gripping his upper arms. His face was a sickly pale white, his eyes wide and hollow with absolute soul-crushing terror. He looked at me, a silent, pathetic plea for mercy written across his terrified features. I offered him a single freezing smile that held absolutely zero warmth. I will see you in federal court, Brandon. I promised, my voice ringing with lethal certainty. Make sure you hire a remarkably good defense attorney. You are going to need a massive miracle. The lead FBI agent gave a curt, professional nod, signaling that the arrest procedure was complete. Let us go, the agent commanded, turning Brandon forcefully toward the main exit. The heavy, humiliating walk of shame began. Brandon was marched forcefully out of the exclusive dining room, his expensive leather shoes dragging slightly across the floor. He was paraded directly past the tables of elite country club members, the very people he had spent years desperately trying to impress with his fake wealth management persona. The executives and socialites watched him go, their faces filled with a mixture of disgust, shock, and morbid fascination. Brandon kept his head bowed, unable to make eye contact with a single person, as the flashing red and blue lights from the federal vehicles waiting outside painted his humiliated face in alternating colors of absolute disgrace. Back at the table, the devastation was complete. Audrey remained slumped heavily in her mahogany dining chair, her face buried entirely in her trembling hands. She was weeping uncontrollably, her shoulders shaking with the terrifying realization of her impending reality. Jamal was gone. Her marriage was officially destroyed. Her joint bank accounts were being frozen, and she was now facing a massive, insurmountable mountain of debt with absolutely no income to support her lavish lifestyle. The golden child had finally been stripped of her unearned crown, left entirely alone to face the catastrophic consequences of her own relentless greed and financial infidelity. And Patricia was left sobbing pathetically on the floor. The proud, arrogant matriarch who had started the evening by violently demanding my sapphire necklace was now nothing more than a ruined, penniless woman crying on the marble tiles. Her pristine social reputation was permanently, irreversibly obliterated in front of the exact elite audience she had always sought to dominate. There was no recovery from this level of public exposure. The Oakwood Country Club would immediately revoke her membership. Her wealthy friends would instantly sever all contact, and she would be left to face a bleak, impoverished future entirely on her own. The fake empire had finally burned to the ground, leaving nothing but miserable, smoking ruins in its wake. I turned my back on the smoking ruins of their destroyed social empire and simply walked away. I did not spare a single backward glance at the weeping women left slumped among the mahogany tables of the Oakwood Country Club. The heavy atmosphere that had choked me for the entire duration of my marriage instantly lifted, replaced by a surge of pure adrenaline. I moved through the dining room with my head held high, my posture radiating an absolute, untouchable authority. The wealthy patrons scrambled to move out of my path. They parted like the Red Sea, pulling their chairs forward and pressing their bodies against the tables to ensure they did not accidentally brush against the fabric of my black evening gown. They looked at me with a profound mixture of terror and awe, finally recognizing the apex predator that had been hiding in plain sight within their exclusive ranks. Gideon followed a half step behind me, his massive presence ensuring my exit was completely unimpeded. We stepped through the heavy double doors and out into the crisp evening air. The flashing red and blue lights of the federal vehicles were already fading into the distance, carrying my treacherous husband toward his new reality inside a federal holding cell. The valet immediately brought my vehicle forward. It was a sleek black, heavily armored luxury sport utility vehicle. Gideon opened the heavy rear door for me. I slid into the plush leather interior. The quiet hum of the powerful engine offered a soothing contrast to the hysterical screaming I had just left behind. Gideon closed the door with a solid, reassuring thud, sealing me inside my private, secure sanctuary. He took his place in the front passenger seat, and my driver smoothly navigated the heavy vehicle down the winding, manicured driveway of the country club. I leaned back against the headrest, watching the city lights blur past the tinted bulletproof windows. The sheer magnitude of my victory settled deep into my chest. I had successfully excised a malignant tumor from my life, protecting my hard-earned assets and securing my absolute freedom. The agonizing years of enduring Patricia's relentless insults, Audrey's greedy entitlement, and Brandon's pathetic, fragile ego were permanently over. I was returning to my life exactly as I had built it, entirely on my own terms, beholden to absolutely no one. The drive to the downtown financial district was swift and entirely peaceful. We arrived at my luxury high-rise building, bypassing the main lobby and pulling directly into the secure subterranean parking garage. I stepped into my private biometric elevator, swiping my fingerprint across the scanner. The doors slid shut, and the elevator rocketed upward, carrying me toward the top of the skyline. When the doors opened directly into the foyer of my sprawling penthouse, I was greeted by a scene of highly coordinated, ruthless efficiency. My personal logistics team and a bonded moving crew had already been deployed. While I was at the country club dismantling Brandon's life, my staff had been methodically erasing his physical presence from my home. The massive living area was a hive of focused activity. Workers in matching uniforms were rapidly boxing up his expensive designer suits, his collection of luxury watches, and the golf clubs he had purchased using my corporate accounts. They moved with surgical precision, ensuring absolutely nothing belonging to me was accidentally packed away. My lead estate manager approached me with a digital tablet. She informed me that every single item belonging to Brandon had been thoroughly cataloged, photographed for legal documentation, and secured in heavy-duty transport crates. The crates were being moved to a climate-controlled storage unit on the outskirts of the city, fully prepaid for exactly 1 month. After that 30-day window expired, the storage fees would become Brandon's personal problem. I nodded my approval, deeply satisfied by the flawless execution of the removal process. The penthouse already felt infinitely lighter, the air cleaner, and more breathable, without his oppressive, arrogant energy occupying the space. I walked past the busy movers and headed directly toward the custom-built wine cellar adjacent to the kitchen. I selected a rare vintage Bordeaux that I had been saving for a truly spectacular occasion. Tonight was the perfect moment to uncork it. I poured a generous measure of the dark, rich red wine into a crystal glass. The complex aroma filled the air, a sensory celebration of my absolute independence. Holding the glass, I walked down the long, quiet corridor toward my primary suite. I bypassed the master bedroom and entered my heavily fortified home office. The heavy oak door closed behind me with a satisfying magnetic click, sealing me inside the digital command center where Brandon had foolishly triggered his own downfall. I walked over to the sleek desk positioned in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the glittering urban landscape. I set my wine glass down and turned to face my reflection in the dark glass. I reached up to my collarbone, my fingers finding the cool silver clasp of the sapphire and diamond necklace. With a smooth, practiced motion, I unhooked the jewelry and lowered it into my hands. The deep blue gem caught the ambient light of the city, shimmering with quiet brilliance. The hidden microphone embedded inside the silver casing had performed its duty flawlessly, capturing the exact criminal confession required to secure my absolute victory. I opened the velvet-lined jewelry box resting on my desk and gently placed the necklace inside, securing the lid. My mother's legacy had not been tarnished by Patricia's greedy hands. Instead, it had served as the ultimate instrument of my liberation and their spectacular ruin. I sipped my rich wine and slowly opened my laptop. Bringing up my company's dashboard, glowing data illuminated my face. Finally free of the toxic family, forever filled with absolute empowerment, complete financial independence, and cold justice, I am fully ready to conquer my next digital frontier. The saga of Olivia and her spectacularly satisfying takedown of her manipulative in-laws serves as a masterclass in self-worth. If there is one profound lesson to extract from this story of cold justice, it is that true power lies in absolute financial and emotional independence. Toxic individuals like Patricia Brandon and Audrey thrive on creating illusions. They use gaslighting, social pressure, and manufactured prestige to force their victims into submission. They expect you to shrink, to apologize for your success, and to hand over your hard-earned assets just to keep the fake peace. Olivia's journey teaches us that the moment you stop playing by their twisted rules, their entire empire of lies collapses. She did not win by screaming the loudest. She won because she had quietly and meticulously built a fortress of independence that they simply could not breach. Furthermore, the story highlights the critical importance of ironclad boundaries. Olivia's wealth was a tool, but her real weapon was her unbreakable self-respect. She recognized her own value and refused to let parasitic relatives diminish her accomplishments or dictate her worth. When confronted with blatant extortion and profound disrespect, she did not seek a messy reconciliation, she sought permanent severance. We must learn to recognize when a relationship is purely transactional and have the courage to walk away fully empowered by our own capabilities. Ultimately, you do not owe your success, your peace of mind, or your resources to people who view you as nothing more than a convenient stepping stone to fund their delusions. Protect your peace, secure your independence, and never let anyone make you feel small in your own life. Share this reflection with someone who needs the courage to set firm boundaries and reclaim their personal power today.